Good afternoon, my fellow Americans. This is your future president, Samuel Ronan. Welcome to the stream. We have a lot of stuff today, and in fact, we have some new items to the stream as well as some slight changes to how we're going to do the stream. It turns out that I get very easily distracted and hyperfixated when I play video games for stream. And although the video game play is supposed to be fun and interactive and a way to showcase, more than just politics, it doesn't help if I'm just hyperfixated and then ignoring everything that's happening on chat, because isn't that the whole point of streaming, to interact with the community? Unless I'm extremely super talented and then you would just watch me because I'm really good. But that's not the case. So we're going to have a moderator keep me or help me stay focused for the stream moving forward when we do the gameplay. That being said, we've also decided to integrate a spin the wheel option for the channel. Oh yeah, I guess green would get green screened out a little bit, but neither here nor there. It is a little loose, apparently. I didn't do a really great job of connecting it. So you can redeem the spin the wheel and whatever it lands on, which apparently we're gonna have to figure something out with that. I'll read off what it is, and that'll be the subject that we talk about. So in this case, well, it stopped on a housing, but in this case it would be housing, and then we talk about, housing in America and political policies and how we can change that. That's one thing we can do. And then there's also the, you can straight up redeem for, I think, 5,000 channel points. I wanted to make it expensive so that it's not constantly getting interrupted. But I did want to make it possible for viewers like you to actually talk about issues that matter to you, right? And not just you talk about it, but for me to engage with it as well. Remember that streamer that was doing the debate me, call in, whatever nonsense? And they just had like their 8 topics, and they were very difficult to actually debate because it's like, do you believe in human rights? Well, yes. Okay, debate me, bro. Well, like, what are we gonna do? Take on the option that I don't believe in human rights just so I can challenge your views? That's kind of silly. I do hope that we do get to a point where we can do a debate me, bro session. And for no other reason than for viewers like you to truly understand that I am nuanced and well-versed in most policies, and those that I'm not, I am at least informed enough to where I could at least make considerations or discussion points. So, hello there. I love the wheel. And greetings, working and lurking. Have a good stream. Awesome. So, yeah, and that's part of it, right? So, usually in the intro, all right, I usually pick up on that, and then obviously when we're talking about policy, it's pretty easy to read the chat as well. But when we're doing videos or when I'm doing the game, it's harder for me to focus. I'm gonna blame it on neurodiversity for now until there's a different reason, such as I'm just bad at being a streamer. But yeah, so that wheel did not look good at all, did it? Does look a little better further away, but then the green is covered. So, mystery! And it does kind of get garbled a little bit. It fell on housing again. Damn, this wheel really likes doing public housing. So anyway, more to come on that. Or rather, not more to come. You can redeem it now. You can do 1 per stream. It's difficult to read comments while playing. Yeah, especially if you're not like an extremely professional gamer like the Viper or somebody like that. But yeah, one of these days, instead of having a green screen, with a visualization of manifestation of being in the White House, I do. If it's legally possible to buy this flag, the presidential flag, I look behind me as if it's actually there. If it's actually possible to buy that flag, because I know it's possible to buy this flag, I do intend to eventually have a true setup with the background and probably like a little thing. I don't see how it couldn't be illegal, but I could see how there might be, like, getting an official one might be difficult. But anyway, that's also neither here nor there. Today's stream, as you can see, is going to be about obviously freeing Palestine, and then we're going to be talking to Oshun about the history of Puerto Rican independence, and that we're going to have a bit of a discussion on my views on Puerto Rican independence, what I think should happen, or the history of and the impact of Puerto Rico and America. We're also going to discuss why Americans want to leave America. Of course, ongoing politics and current events. We might even touch on the Olympics a little bit. Simone Biles finally got the double Yurchenko, I think it was. And she's, of course, being targeted by the judges because she's utterly dominant in her field. So we're probably going to have to talk about that as well. And then that last bit right there, Age of Empires 4, first time playing. The reason why we're going to go Age of Empires 4 instead of Age of Empires 2 is because, one, I'm still a little skittish to get into the PvP, largely because I'm also very competitive and petty. I don't like losing, and I'm not good enough to be competitive, so I'm going to be really upset if I'm not making it up to like 2k elo. So instead, I finally finished all of the achievements and beat all of the Victors and Vanquished challenges on hard mode, got all of the achievements associated with them, so I'm caught up on Age of Empires 2, but I realized we've never played Age of Empires 1, and we've never played Age of Empires 4, and although I have played Age of Empires 3, we haven't done that either, but it was, I picked up on that a little bit too late to actually download in time for the stream, and I didn't want to impact the stream. So, without any further ado, the way we're going to do the Puerto Rican discussion is we're going to use Discord as our voice chat, and presumably the voice chat from Discord will simply go through the computer desktop audio on this channel, and we will simply talk about Puerto Rican independence and so on and so forth. And if there are videos, we will transition to, or actually there is a video, so I'll copy that and we'll set that video to this section so that if we want to interact with the video, we can do so as well. And we will see how that works. This is a huge milestone. Hello. Milestone in which way? Simone Biles, or, well, I don't know how long you've been listening for, so please expand that thought real quick. While you're doing that, no, Oshun's gonna join. Got you. Yes. She is going to grace us with her knowledge of Puerto Rico, her background, her history, her culture. Hello, everyone. By the way, Oshun, were we supposed to watch this first and then have our discussion, or have our discussion then watch this? Give you a chance to respond to that. Watch first. Okay, so let's go ahead.
What happened on this street in the town of Ponce was one of the most brutal ways in which the U.S. government tried to silence the pro-independence movement in Puerto Rico.
Just so you know, I'm quite capable of being an
march ended up with guards killing 19 people.
And on that note, Oshun, by all means, challenge anything I say. Like, you don't have to give me the kid gloves for our little discussion here. I really, I might not be as well versed in Puerto Rican history. I'm very clearly not, but this is obviously going to be very helpful and informative. So my views might just come from a very privileged background. So by all means, debate me, bro.
And injuring more than 200.
Yo vi tirar a la policía. Porque ellos le dispararon a la gente que estaban en la acera.
It also served to send a message to anyone who aligned with the Nationalist Party.
Puerto Rico, the island has prospered under U.S. rule, but a tiny extremist party committed to violence occasionally erupts
doesn't
in
that
anti-US
sound like the Palestinians and Hamas in their own country? It's being occupied by Israel.
¿Por qué se nos ataca tanto por decir que nosotros queremos que Puerto Rico sea una nación libre.
Yeah, extremist.
El gran milagro es que existan independentistas.
This video is the first in a series of 3 where I'm going to be talking about Puerto Rico's status. And I'm starting
Puerto
with the
Rico.
least popular option, independence.
Debate me, Sam. We're gonna get to that. Pop culture.
After this video,
Really?
your
Really?
life is never going to be the same. So I need you to stop whatever.
Today, only a minority
So, we now have a wheel that you guys can redeem with channel points, and we can do discussion points on based on where it stops. And then there's also a channel redemption where you can choose the topic and we discuss it. And now that the Discord is actually established and we have several voice channels in place, we can actually have a direct discussion as well now. A B Ronan? What does that mean? Oh, a Bronin. I'm hip with it. I'm
of Puerto
hip
Ricans
and
vote in
with it.
favor of Puerto Rico being fully independent from the U.S. But those who do support that option say that's because for many years the U.S. government persecuted, imprisoned, and even killed supporters of independence. And perhaps there's no better way
Shocking.
to understand that history than to look at the life of the father of the Puerto Rican independence movement, Pedro Albizu Campos. Albizu was a child when the U.S. invaded Puerto Rico in 1898. He saw troops march in his town of Ponce. He was a gifted student and he went on to study law at Harvard. And then came World War I, when the U.S. military was segregated. Being a dark-skinned Puerto Rican, he served in an African-American unit where he would be exposed to racism in the U.S. That
Damn,
experience would play a
Oshun.
part in
It's
shaping
almost
his
as if your
attitude towards
heritage
the
and
United
hometown
States.
is
After the
directly
military,
tied to
he
all
returned
this.
to Harvard, and there he worked with and was inspired by leaders fighting for independence for their own countries. After he got his law degree, Albizu turned down offers like working for the U.S. Supreme Court. Instead, he chose to return to Puerto Rico. He joined the independence movement, and he was vocal about his support for taking up arms to free Puerto Rico. One of the reasons
Wow.
Albizu believed Puerto Rico needed
So
independence.
he was the Malcolm X of Puerto Rican independence. That's. I wonder why I have such strong feelings about it. No kidding. I feel like I am going to be beaten to death on this debate. Or we might actually be in agreement.
Was
I
because
have
of the
another,
damage that
15 minutes and 18
U.S.
seconds here.
corporate interests were causing. Sugar companies were taking up land and keeping workers in poverty by paying them some
Banana
60
Republic,
cents a
nice.
day for 12-hour shifts. Here's a speech Albizu gave to
No,
workers.
don't be gentle. Take them tiny little mouse fist gloves off.
Malos como son, egoístas como son. Si encontraran oro en los huesos de nosotros, nos molerían en sus centrales azucareras.
In 1934, Albizu
Times
led
just
the
don't
workers
change.
on an island-wide strike and won, forcing the U.S. sugar companies to pay the workers more. That gained him support with Puerto Ricans, but it also gained him some enemies from the U.S., and things turned violent the following year.
La policía insular, bajo el mando del gobierno de Estados Unidos, masacró a 4 jóvenes nacionalistas.
In 1935, U.S. police officers killed 3 nationalists who were sitting in a car and a 4th one who came to their defense. No officers were charged in those killings. That came to be known as the Rio Piedras massacre. And the following year, nationalists retaliated. 2 men killed the U.S.-appointed police chief. They were arrested and executed at the police headquarters without a trial.
Wow.
Albizu publicly called
So let's talk about America being the bad guys and always having been the bad guys. Albizu Campos was the first Puerto. It sounds like they keep saying Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico. Am I saying that right? To graduate from Harvard Law, he graduated magna cum laude. Damn. Today's stream would be like the equivalent of your teacher bringing in the TV. It's like the equivalent of when the Scholastic book order box arrived to your classroom and you felt special because you ordered a book and it's your prize that arrived. Okay, so it's Puerto Rico. Okay. But yeah, no, so far, atrocity after atrocity. America was like, oh, we had to end slavery, so let's go invade and colonize more countries and treat them like absolute garbage. Yeah. And honestly, none of this was taught in school. I have never heard of Albizu Campos. I've never heard of the sugar mills or plantations in Puerto Rico. I was never taught how to say it correctly. All I knew is that Puerto Rico was a territory of the United States, and that I think I even had an elementary school friend who was from Puerto Rico, and he was like, yeah, it's really poor down there, and it's really nice on the mainland, da-da-da-da-da, but of course we were both kids, so we didn't know this. And the fact that these kind of massacres were the same kind of atrocities being committed against black people during the desegregation movement and during the Jim Crow era, I mean, not surprising. Worse still is that this is what America did to Puerto Rico is exactly what Israel is doing to Palestine, but even worse. Well, actually, in the exact same way, Puerto Rico is its own country, and America, being the invader, is doing it to them. Same thing with Israel. Israel is the invader to the Palestinian land. The actual nation of Palestine existed before Israel, but now they're the colonizing force, massacring Palestinians in their own homes. Wait until you see the provinces of the Philippines. Well, quarter Filipino, and I don't know apparently enough about my own heritage. This is why many Puerto Ricans identify with the Palestinian struggle. Clearly, because it's a one-for-one comparison.
The martyrs and heroes, and he was arrested shortly after for sedition or for inciting people to rebel against the U.S. government.
You know what's funny about sedition? Is it legal to rebel against the U.S. and the Constitution? Let's see. Whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title, or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both. Under 18 U.S. Code 2383. But the Constitution doesn't, I think, have that. I think literally the right to overthrow is, again, these conservative nutjobs are saying it themselves, that the Declaration of Independence gives the American people the right to overthrow their government. Is the Declaration of Independence legal grounds of defense for sedition in the U.S.? Not that I'm talking about sedition on a stream and gonna get immediately copyright struck. I'm just saying it's a conversation that is worth having. But according to the nationalarchives.gov, the Declaration of Independence states the principles on which our government and our identity as Americans are based. Unlike the other founding documents, the Declaration of Independence is not legally binding, but it is powerful. Abraham Lincoln called it a rebuke and a stumbling block to tyranny and oppression. So, I guess that is, I guess I was wrong. Sedition, i.e. trying to overthrow the federal government, or challenging the federal government, is against the law. Even though the Declaration of Independence was doing exactly that from a different foreign power. But hey, what do I know, right? That's what the Founding Fathers did, exactly. They do have leftist parties in elected offices in Puerto Rico. We celebrate sedition once a year in the summer to then do this. Exactly. One of the leaders is interviewed in this video. Nice. If Puerto Rico were a state, they'd be a green state. Well, we'll get into that. And we will listen on to Oshun's opinions as to why she's for or against that. Obviously, save that for when we're discussing.
And a jury of mostly Puerto Ricans found him not guilty.
Of
so
course.
The judge ordered a new trial with a new jury. And
Wow.
this time, 10 jurors from the U.S. and only 2 Puerto Ricans found him guilty. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
See, that is scummy. I don't know if we caught all of that at once.
For inciting people to rebel against the U.S. government. Albizu went to trial, and a jury of mostly Puerto Ricans found him not guilty. So the judge ordered a new trial with a new jury. And this time, 10...
So, he was found not guilty, and then double jeopardy was instituted by the presiding judge, where a jury was then used against him, stacked against him, which is also violating the Constitution and our principles. Found him guilty, locked him up for 10 years, and evidently tortured him, which I'm certain is going to be discussed
from the
in
U.S.
this.
and only 2 Puerto Ricans found him guilty. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. This brings us to 1937, the year that the Ponce massacre happened. The museum that tells the story of this massacre is now closed because it was damaged during an earthquake.
That's not corrupt or anything. Wow. That's 2 ads in not even 5 minutes of content. Like, I get that they need to make money, but
nationalist
yikes.
Headquarters in Ponce. And that's where that peaceful march I told you at the beginning of this video was taking place. And it was in part to protest Albisu's arrest. Well, when the US government heard it was taking place, they ordered police to stop it. The guards showed up heavily armed and they started shooting at the crowd.
I bet that was
Among
powerful.
the people they killed was a 14-year-old girl. An investigation by the federal government found that the US appointed governor was to blame for the massacre, but no one was ever arrested or charged for the murders. The governor didn't even apologize. This is a picture of the relatives of the victims. You can see the
So the US government orders the Puerto Rican government to, massacre people. Then the federal government from the United States investigates the Puerto Rican governor, finds him guilty, and nothing happens. That's
the wall
that's
behind
not
them
okay.
is covered in bullet holes.
And this is
Some 10 years
1937.
later,
This
Albizu
isn't
was free again, and the
1800s.
government passed a law to further silence nationalists. They made it illegal for people to write about, talk about, or organize to try to take down the US government. But the nationalists carried on planning an armed revolution to free Puerto Rico. In 1950, they carried out a series of attacks. They led revolts in different towns. They attacked the governor's mansion and even tried to assassinate President Harry Truman in D.C.
Extreme fanatics of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party try to force their way in.
Wow! These extreme fanatics under imperial control and occupation tried to take a shot at Harry S. Truman. Wow! The United States is illegally occupying and terrorizing the state of Puerto Rico, and the Puerto Ricans are fed up with it, and now they're extremists? Wow. It actually kind of makes you wonder why the United States was even against the Nazis when their own activities during the exact same time frame and immediately after were exactly the same. Not even like empirically the same or theoretically the same, exactly the same. Sure, there wasn't euthanization of Puerto Ricans, so okay, fine. Maybe it was still colonization. It was still infiltrating and taking over land that didn't belong to them.
And guns
Yikes.
blazing to assassinate the President of the United States.
They were unsuccessful and had to surrender after the United States used military force and killed almost 30 nationalists. Hundreds were arrested, and Albizu was sentenced to 80 years in prison for masterminding the uprising. In the US, the whole thing was mostly reported as an incident among Puerto Ricans. So a few years later, the nationalists decided it was time to embarrass the US internationally, and they attacked Congress.
In Washington, D.C., ruthless, fanatic violence erupted in the halls of Congress.
4 nationalists fired shots in the House of Representatives and displayed the Puerto Rican flag. No one was killed, but 5 congressmen were injured.
The gun wielders and to their accomplices goes the evil distinction of having perpetrated a criminal outrage almost unique in America's history.
This is Rafael Cancel Miranda, one of the shooters when he was in his 80s.
Si tuviera que hacer.
So the Puerto Ricans have been more successful at taking an actual fight to the federal government than literally any other country in all of U.S. history, and they're an island in the middle of nowhere that's being occupied by the United States federal government despite all of... Wow. We should not only be apologizing to Puerto Ricans, but we should be catering to them to enter into our military. Are you kidding me? That's a level of skill and organization and dedication that most organizations could only dream of. Like, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? My people are hardcore. Yeah, no kidding. I was getting back to watching House of Cards last season, and Robin Wright's character mentioned about attempted assassinations and said Truman was one of them. I did not know at the time what it was for, but now I do. Today I learned. Yeah, listen, the past 6 minutes and 46 seconds have been, you know what I mean? Like, we're not taught American history, and I am a political junkie. I'm an activist, you know? Like, I've been shaking my little mouse fist against the government too. I even went on CNN and shook my little mouse fist. But I don't hold a candle to these Puerto Ricans at all. Yeah, and if they became a state, they 100% should be leftist. I mean, I don't know. Ultranationalism and conservatism has found its way into France and once again into Germany. So I won't go that far. I'm just saying, though, the resistance movement of Puerto Rico has so far been possibly one of the most effective in history against the United States. No kidding. Absolutely. A Ronan administration will force textbook companies to tell the truth in the textbooks. And quote me on this, because I do believe that is already in my platform. Education. I'm just checking it to make sure, because I'm fairly certain I do have it. Equally funded, private, universal, education. Okay, so that's the funding part. Curriculum and enforcement of curriculum. All right, so that's down there. Gonna go ahead and add that for the class to join me in reading. Boards of education below the level of state shall be abolished, and those duties and responsibilities shall be carried out by the superintendent. Curriculum determination shall be carried out by education professionals and adhere to national and state standards, respectively. Any government instruction body, department, board, or similar authority that attempts to ban books based on prejudice, political, or non-academic reasons shall have those decision and policymakers removed from their respective positions and charged under the 14th. The same holds true for whitewashing history, not teaching the horrors of slavery, the negative impact of U.S. imperialism, the genocide of First Nations, or the various historical crimes committed against minority groups by the federal government, respective to the age groups being taught. Antebellum and similar pro-Confederate curriculum shall be disallowed, and violations thereof will be considered acts of treason against the United States of America, or sedition. I think sedition might be the better word. And then the rest is accountability, equitability, disabilities, so on and so forth. So, pop culture, just so you are fully well aware, and anybody else that might be watching this now and in the future, I 100% will and am standing by teaching true U.S. history, age appropriate, about our atrocities and our crimes against humanity, which does include Puerto Rico.
Volvería a ser. Nos asesinan democráticamente, pero tú no puedes levantarle la vista porque estás cometiendo un acto de terror.
Yeah, anything against the empire is an act of terror.
Para atrás.
When she was arrested, Lolita Lebron said she didn't go to kill anyone, but to die for Puerto Rico. Those words would inspire Oscar López Rivera.
Me puso como a cuestionarme allí mismo, ¿qué vas a hacer tú si una mujer puertorriqueña está dispuesta a dar su vida por Puerto Rico? ¿Y tú, que eres puertorriqueño, qué vas a hacer?
So wait, her name's Lolita? Does that have anything to do with the Japanese Lolita? Or is that just a coincidence? The days of protecting feelings are over, the truth must be told. Exactly, especially when it comes to U.S. hegemony and atrocities. That cannot be ignored. Lolita is a nickname for Dolores? It's kind of like Dick is a nickname for Richard. How do you get that?
Oscar says his disillusion with the U.S. government started when he joined the military.
Es Vietnam donde yo aprendo lo que es Estados Unidos.
He says he didn't want to go to war, but at this point Puerto Ricans were U.S. citizens and he was drafted.
En esa carta había un mensaje, decía,
so they were drafted,
si no
but have
te reportas
no rights
al centro
otherwise.
de inducción en la fecha indicada, puedes enfrentar hasta 5 años de prisión federal. Yo tenía 22 años y lo menos que yo iba a hacer era ir a una prisión. La opción entonces era prestar servicio militar obligatorio.
Oscar says he saw his friends die in Vietnam.
Cuando dieron el reporte, le habían metido 35 balas a ese compañero, porque él cayó de rodillas. Ya ahí automáticamente es cuando uno comienza a tener una apreciación de lo que está pasando.
And it makes you wonder too, were they drafting Puerto Rican men just to avoid massacres or another uprisings, right? Because, the women, they're just going to stay home and cook and clean, despite Lolita Lebron absolutely being a freedom fighter. They want to get rid of the men, and much like they want to arrest black men and charge them with felonies so that they cannot be productive members of society. That's why there's a disproportionate amount of black people and black Americans in general with felony convictions, and a predominant number of those are men. So, same tactics, different flavor. Yikes.
Piense en las vidas que se pierden. En otras palabras, somos dispensables, somos seres que no contamos para nada.
He came back from war as a hero, and he received the Bronze Star for his service. But years later, he would be labeled a terrorist.
Of course, because
Oscar joined a group that also believed in taking up arms to fight for Puerto Rico's independence. U.S. prosecutors accused...
Could you imagine any of these Puerto Rican freedom fighters in America working with leftists in America? They'd be like, hey, ¿qué pasa? Why aren't you picking up your rifles? Why aren't you fighting? You just post on the online? Okay? I know a little bit of Spanish and really terrible accents, but I'm just saying, like, the leftist movement in America, compared to them, they were organized, they were trained, they had a common sense of purpose and a goal and the conviction to carry it out. We got none of that here in America.
Group of carrying out more than 100 bomb attacks, including one in New York City that killed 4 people. But Oscar says he never killed anyone.
Si hay un pequeñito, un pelo que haya de que yo participé de esa actividad, entonces tú me puedes declarar terrorista. Tú me puedes declarar terrorista, pero si no...
Oh, crap, I forgot. I made a cup of tea. Now it's probably cold. Sorry about that. Geez, this is the horrific in the events during the counter response to the uprising, right? And the thing is, like, Puerto Rican independence has been ongoing since the early 1900s. Like, it never stopped. Now, well, I don't know, maybe never stopped is not the right word, but it certainly has had its actions.
Prosecutors
couldn't link him to any deaths, but they did charge him with plotting to overthrow the U.S. government after they arrested him during a traffic stop.
Agarra ahí un bolso a la parte de atrás del carro, un backpack, y lo abre y ahí hay una pistola. Entonces él grita al otro policía, el otro policía viene y ahí es que nos arresta.
He spent more than 35 years in prison, including 12 in solitary confinement. But he did not change his mind about Puerto Rico.
Yo creo que Puerto Rico tiene el potencial para ser una nación libre y soberana. Yo no tengo la menor duda de eso.
Wow.
How to open your car door while submerged underwater. A fatal construction flaw in all recent automobiles makes it virtually impossible to escape the car after crashing into water. This ingenious innovation elevates your odds of survival.
How do I pause it and then it goes to an immediate... Whatever.
¿Cuáles son los pros de...
So yeah, dude gets 35 years in prison, 12 years of solitary, which is obviously abuse and cruel and unusual punishment, which is a violation of the 8th Amendment. He was clearly framed with the gun, and even then there's a Second Amendment right to have a gun, which if Puerto Ricans are citizens, then they are protected under the Constitution. So, being a political prisoner in the United States and as early as the 1960s and 70s, like, so we've been doing some heinous behavior that we condemn other countries for, except for Israel, in quite recent history. And I'm sure as we go forward, there's going to be more. Also, Oshun, I mean, this is your people. This is your country, your history, literally your family's history. If this video is a bit much, I know you picked it, but if this video is a bit much, we can certainly shift gears and cool off before we continue. I don't want to... I'm certainly not trying to make light of this. I am actually shocked and dismayed at how evil the United States was against Puerto Rico, although it's clearly not a surprise, because we know how the United States treated African Americans and other minority groups throughout history, whether it was the Chinese, Italians, Irish, whatever. The United States has always been horrendous towards the other. So, okay, if we're good, we're good. All right, we're good. Just trying to be respectful.
Primero, la posibilidad de mandar nosotras en nuestra propia casa.
Maria Lourdes Santiago is one of the leaders of the Puerto Rican Independence Party. The party has been around since the 40s, and in the 50s, it got as much as 20% of the vote, making it the second largest party in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
But that number has been shrinking ever since, hitting 2% in 2016. And when asked the question of Puerto Rico's status, no more than 6% of Puerto Ricans choose independence.
Wow.
Senator Santiago blames the government's persecution of independence supporters.
Durante
So that's still
décadas,
ongoing.
la policía de
Nice.
Puerto Rico, en
Go figure.
contubernio con el gobierno federal, mantuvo expedientes
This lady right here,
criminales.
not bought and
Había
paid
un
for
piso
apparently by
completo del
the
cuartel
government
general
of America.
dedicado a documentar las actividades de los independentistas, como si era una
That's
reunión
sick.
del Partido Independentista o de
Profiling
cualquier otra
citizens.
agrupación.
Because
Fue
they have
algo que
an
ameritaba un
accurate
castigo.
grievance.
She's talking about the carpetas. For decades, the FBI kept secret files on people who did as much as go to a meeting about independence. These secret files were called carpetas.
Your dad had a file?
and the
You
people who
probably have a
had
file.
them were
Damn.
often denied jobs and blacklisted.
La
Para mi
carpetas.
papá fue un choque tan duro que mi hermana y yo resultáramos ser independentistas porque eso anticipaba una vida más difícil.
But with a new generation, that stigma attached to the Independence Party might be dissolving. In 2020, Senator Santiago was the candidate who got the most votes to be elected to the Puerto Rico Senate. But some would argue that voting for a candidate from the Independence Party is not the same as voting for independence for Puerto Rico. And it gets even more confusing if you mix in US politics. Some Republicans don't want Puerto Rico to be a state because it has billions of dollars in debt and because Puerto Ricans speak Spanish. And some Democrats do want Puerto Rico to be a state because they believe that Congress members from here would be Democrats, therefore giving them more power. But they also say that would finally give Puerto Rico voting representation in Congress. Senator Santiago says, no thank you.
Asumir que lo mejor que le puede pasar a un pueblo es asimilarse a otro, es en el fondo, aunque haya en la superficie buenas intenciones, en el fondo es una visión profundamente racista que desprecia la capacidad de un pueblo y de su identidad nacional de echar para adelante en igual condiciones con las otras naciones del mundo.
So to be clear, my views on this subject were prior to and without any knowledge of the history of Puerto Rico, just understanding that it is a territory, and that territories in general don't have the same rights and privileges as states. We'll get into the debate, and I will defend my existing policy, but I am declaring I am open-minded. They'd be more inclined to be Green Party members of Congress. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, our Green Party is extremely weak compared to other Green parties.
But then the question is, what about federal funding? Because Puerto Rico gets billions of dollars from the US every year.
Es bien importante recordar que el sistema de beneficencia estadounidense, sobre todo cuando opera en el contexto colonial, está diseñado para perpetuar la pobreza.
Well, so was US domestic policy regardless under the current regimes.
Para que la gente, para no incentivar a la gente a trabajar. Sin embargo, no aparecen recursos para desarrollo económico de Puerto Rico.
One thing that has made it very clear to some that Puerto Rico is still a colony of the US is the board that was imposed by the US on Puerto Rico to manage its finances. That's a group of members who were not elected by the Puerto Rican people.
Wow! No taxation without representation is what caused the War of American Independence. And what are we doing? What are we doing? We are literally, not figuratively, not metaphorically, not hyperbole, we are literally doing the same thing to them that England did to us when we were colonies.
Who have recently demonstrated that they have the power to override the local elected government. They're in charge of getting Puerto Rico out of bankruptcy, but they're also responsible for cuts to things like education and pensions.
La realidad de la Junta de Control Fiscal está ayudando a que el país enfrente lo que significa vivir bajo la bota del gobierno estadounidense, sobre todo una juventud que ha crecido en la precariedad, sienten que el sistema.
Look at how people of Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands are also treated. They can't even vote in a general election. And this was recently and still happening. Well, I might have to revise some of my foreign policy with regards to U.S. territories because clearly I didn't do any research. I just took it at face value that they are territories in America that don't have the same rights as states and to act accordingly. This is something significantly worse and more insidious. This is blatant colonization. This is blatant disregard for civil rights and autonomy.
El sistema les empuja hacia el exilio económico.
Wow.
Definitivamente de aquí a un tiempo a que me gradúe no me veo lamentablemente dentro de mi isla, aunque quisiera. Es doloroso siquiera pensarlo, tener que irme.
Robin Lee wants independence for Puerto Rico.
Why would you want to be a state under an empire that has literally corrupted everything we have today? They have tried to erase our culture. They literally persecuted us when they got here. We did not receive them or invited them here to have some coffee or some galletitas. Like they literally arrived and they started bombing us.
This was the ultimate survival food of our forefathers. Cooled and sealed into bison hide bags.
How many more fucking ads can one 18-minute video fit?
I met her at Casa Canales in Jayuya. That town was at the center of the uprising in the 50s, and where nationalists tried to declare Puerto Rico a free republic.
Creo que es un lugar bastante sentimental, como Pipiola.
Robin believes any other status for Puerto Rico would be risking her identity as a Puerto Rican.
Yo nací en Puerto Rico, soy puertorriqueña, y ellos quieren borrar lo que queda de nuestra puertorriqueñidad para poder incluirnos a la suya, para poder hacernos igual que ellos. Si no somos igual que ellos, no nos van a incluir. Espero que de viejita pueda tal vez decir que puedo regresar a mi isla o quedarme en mi isla y porque sea independiente.
Puerto Ricans want some kind of a relationship with the United States, either statehood or Commonwealth, or a form of Commonwealth, which they call free association.
Despite the fact that you, as an individual, would prefer independence for Puerto Rico, you're clear that the majority of Puerto Ricans don't want independence.
Absolutely. And that is a fact that I don't like, but I have to come to terms with it.
Emilio Pantojas Garcia is a historian who has both studied the persecution of pro-independence Puerto Ricans and lived it.
I have a file, an illegal file, that was created on me because I was for independence. And the FBI,
you have a carpeta.
A carpeta. I do have a carpeta.
But even putting all of that aside, he's aware that most Puerto Ricans are not willing to risk federal funding or the U.S. passports for future generations.
The colony has certain advantages. The world is contradictory. And so the colony, being the most important colony of the most powerful country in the world, has its advantages, but it also has great disadvantages. And you will see, if you interview other people, the self-hate, the self-derision, because it doesn't come bluntly. I hate myself. It means, oh, I want to be an American. I want to be part of the United States. We want to be part of this. We want to be part of that. The federal funds. And so that's self-hate. That is not trusting yourself. That is colonialism in the worst expression, which is the colonialism of the soul and the mind of the people.
So, could Puerto Rico make it on its own? Independence supporters say, of course. In fact, they believe that being free from the United States means opening up to a world of possibilities.
Puerto Rico is an economically viable country. If it were to be part of a community of the Caribbean, there are sovereign countries that are small and progress. So we're not going to starve. We will need to work more, for sure, of course.
But if the majority of Puerto Ricans don't want independence, what other options are there? Well, there's something in the middle that ranges from a version of what we have today all the way to an option that would give Puerto Rico more sovereignty, and of course their statehood. I'm going to be exploring those options in the next 2 videos, so stay tuned for the next couple of weeks when I'm going to be posting that. Thank you so much for watching. I also want to thank Brandon Berkey, who helped me again with all the interviews for this video, and Edna Pavon, who edited this video. And thank you for supporting me. Remember, I have a Patreon if you want to continue to support my videos, and I'll see you soon.
So, I am a little embarrassed that when I was coming up with my granting statehood policy, and I will share it because transparency is something I truly believe in. I wrote, Puerto Rico should be granted statehood and all of the rights and benefits therein. Development of Puerto Rico shall be given priority to current residents with special considerations to small business owners. The idea being, I believed that Puerto Rico deserved having a senator and 2 congresspeople in the U.S. House to actually be able to speak on its own behalf, a governor that can dictate its own terms for its own state, and a National Guard for protection of its own resources and land, much like the other 50 states have. I went further and said that D.C. and U.S. territories shall have the same opportunities, and that First Nations in the United States as well, the 11 most populous indigenous tribes in America, would each receive, it was 2 senators and 1 congressperson, my bad. 2 senators, minimum 1 House, and will drastically improve the livelihood of First Nations people by having them the same governor and military. So, clearly, though, that is a very privileged and ignorant viewpoint. What I should do is update granting statehood to include the option of independence. And, of course, full autonomy as a state. Because clearly the crimes being committed against these territories, especially Puerto Rico and indigenous communities, is significant. And I was clearly aware of the First Nations because I've actually been a part of those protests. I've witnessed it with my own eyes, and I was able to do the research. I was not aware that Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Virgin Islands and other territories were basically colonies. I was not aware of that. And that's probably naive of me for thinking otherwise, but so that is my policy as it currently stands, but I am certainly going to be updating that to include independence, straight 100% independence without any sort of getting in the way of their sovereignty. I think a lot of this also has to do with being able to be an American government with an administration that would actually allow such things to happen. It's all well and good if I say it, but it's a different thing if the next administration that comes after my presidency decides to renege on all of it and then starts tormenting these territories and First Nations, whether they've been granted statehood or been granted their independence. So, with that, Oshun will be joining us for the discussion. I had to preface the discussion by stating that my policy as it currently stands based on what my previous knowledge was versus where I stand now being significantly educated on said issue. So Oshun, please introduce yourself to the stream. Educated on said issue.
Can you hear me?
I can. There's some feedback though, so if you have headphones, put them in. There's some feedback though.
Let me do that. Hold on. Okay, can you hear me better now?
Well, it was more so that I was echoing into the stream, but that isn't happening anymore, so that's good. So, first of all, anybody that's still watching, please let us know if you can hear Oshun, because the whole point of all this is to have her speak rather than having to type everything out. So, Oshun, please introduce yourself, and then by all means, lay right into it. Of course,
So
now you mute. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can. Yep.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I just wanted to. I'm Oshun. I was actually born in Puerto Rico. I'm. I'm hearing echo of myself. So hold on.
Oh, well,
Let me
that's
take this off.
okay.
Yeah.
So that's
Hold-
good in the sense that it's coming through the stream because that's probably what you're hearing.
Yeah.
So as long as your headphones are in and they're not in your ears, you shouldn't hear the echo, but it will prevent the double echo of my voice. Does that make sense? And there might be a delay, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think that's what it is the delay.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was actually born in Ponce, where a lot of what you heard had happened. A lot of those stories happened. And so let me, before we start the discussion, let me give you a little bit of extra background that I don't think they provided, because of course the video would have been too long. So Puerto Rico, Christopher Columbus landed in Puerto Rico on November 19th, 1493. It was during his second trip to the Americas. And Puerto Rico basically wasn't free until 1897, when in the middle of the Spanish-American War, Spain decided to give its independence to Puerto Rico and the Philippines, which is kind of funny. That's when they decided to do it, when they were in the middle of the Spanish-American War. Like Puerto Rico and the Philippines actually have a shared history when it comes to that. So they were both granted independence by Spain, and then the next year, Spain lost the Spanish-American War to the United States, and the United States decided that they wanted the Philippines and Puerto Rico, and Spain said, "Go ahead, you can have them," even though they had granted their independence. So they basically gave to the United States two countries that were independent, like their independence had been ratified since the year before. And they decided to just give both territories to the United States, both countries, because they weren't territories, they weren't colonies, they were their own countries at the time. So Pedro Albizu Campos, the guy that we saw, like he was the father of the Puerto Rican independence movement, that was actually one of his arguments about why Puerto Rico should be independent, is that basically it was illegal when Spain gave Puerto Rico to the United States because it was an independent country already. And I actually didn't find this out till a few years ago. And I was born in Puerto Rico. I went to school over there. You know that I'm pretty educated when it comes to these things. I didn't find this out until a few years ago because they don't teach that in Puerto Rico. Even my dad, who's a college professor in Puerto Rico, didn't know this. Like when I told him, he was like, "What?" And at first, I didn't believe it. I was like, "No, this must be like internet stuff." I looked it up, and it's absolutely true. So then, what happened was, in the 1940s, on July 4th, 1946, the United States decided to grant the Philippines its independence. Truman signed some kind of treaty that gave the Philippines its independence, but they decided to keep Puerto Rico. And not only keep Puerto Rico, but you saw what happened. They decided to
Yeah.
actually double down on what they were doing in Puerto Rico. Some things that, again, I didn't know about until I read a book and I saw a documentary. There's a book called The War Against All Puerto Ricans that is great, but I had to like stop every few pages because it would make me so angry reading it. A few things that were not mentioned is that the United States actually implemented segregation in Puerto Rico. They went over there and they had like Puerto Rican bathrooms, American bathrooms, and there were pictures of it like that I saw in the documentary. And again, we're not taught this in school in Puerto Rico either. There was also a lot of experimentation on Puerto Rican women. Kind of like the Tuskegee experiments, they did the same kind of thing with Puerto Rican women, Puerto Rican men, and up until recently, till the early 2000s, there's an island off of Puerto Rico that is part of Puerto Rico, it's called Vieques, that the United States military was using for experiments. People in that island were dying of cancer at this like super high rates. And the United States government kept denying that it had anything to do with what they were doing over there. And then on top of that, like I think there were some accidents when they actually people got killed and they tried to cover it up. It was a pretty big deal. And it wasn't only until the early 2000s that there was a huge movement in Puerto Rico that finally the United States supposedly, I don't know if it's true, but they said that they were leaving that island and they weren't gonna keep doing the experiments and all that. So um, also, there was a time in Puerto Rico when there's two there's two different conflicting stories about this, but either way, so they say that it was actually illegal to have the Puerto Rican flag, and then others say that it wasn't illegal, but it could get you under government surveillance if you had a Puerto Rican flag. To me, that makes it illegal because
That's
if
the
you
same
can be
thing. Yeah.
put under government surveillance for owning it, that means it's illegal to have. I mean, you can't go to jail just for that. Yeah, but so this was happening until the 1950s, basically, because they were trying to suppress the independence movements in Puerto Rico. So I think that's pretty much the extra background information that I. Oh, and also, so my political career started when I was 8 years old. I've told you this story.
Yeah.
When I was 8 years old, I started a group for kids, and it was because two young men, they were like in their early 20s, that were for the independence of Puerto Rico, were murdered by the police. And that trial was televised every day in Puerto Rico because what happened was that when it first happened, the governor actually praised the policemen that killed the kids as being heroes for killing this terrorist. And then, and really, what they were going to do was blow up a tower that was empty. It was just a communications tower. And they wanted to make a statement over the radio through the communication tower, like a manifest. It was actually on July 25th because that's the day of the commemoration of the U.S. invasion and of the day that Puerto Rico became a Commonwealth. So on that day, they were trying to like read a manifesto over the radio, basically, and they were blowing up a tower. But their group got infiltrated by an undercover cop, and that's how they got caught. But when the when the police got there, the two young men just gave themselves up. They were underneath with their hands up, and they were shot over 100 times each. But like I said, at first, none of this came out because the governor decided to praise the police and say that they did a great job. They killed this terrorist. But the taxi driver that drove the two kids to this, or the young men to this place, said like he would not give a statement saying corroborating what the police said. He was saying, no, I saw them give themselves up with their hands up, and underneath they got shot. And then when they did what is it called? When the when they did the investigation, they did see that all the bullets were in the front, and there were bullets on their arms, and there were bullets like nothing below the knees, which makes sense if they were on their knees with their hands up. So that story kind of radicalized me, even as an 8-year-old. And it made me made me feel solidarity to people that were part of the independence movement, because I was very upset about it. And it was the first time that I found out that the police kills people. Sometimes, that shouldn't be killed. And that's when I found out about the Ponce massacre, because it happened in my hometown. And I mentioned it to one of the priests, because I attended Catholic school. I mentioned it to the Jesuit priest that was one of my teachers, and he was like, "Well, you haven't heard of the Ponce massacre?" I was 8 years old. Of course, I hadn't heard of the Ponce
Right.
massacre. So he told me about the Ponce massacre that you saw in the video, and I was even more appalled. So basically that's when it all started for me. When I was 8 years old, it was because of an incident that had to do with people that were part of the independence movement in Puerto Rico, and I had always. Like you always hear in Puerto Rico, a lot of the people that are for the independence movement are portrayed as being terrorists. And but then I started understanding when I saw that. I was like, wait a minute, how are they the terrorists when they're getting murdered when they didn't do anything? So yeah, so that's just a little bit of the background information that I wanted to provide.
No, and I mean, it's good information. It provides a lot more context that, what America has done to Puerto Rico and other territories, and of course that the U.S. Virgin Islands are right off the coast of Puerto Rico, which means it's the Virgin Islands, and then all these other these island states, Barbados, Dominica, Guadalupe, Antigua and Barbuda, Anguilla, Grenada, all these nations are a part of those islands that connect essentially Latin and South America together between Florida and Venezuela. It's right off the coast of Cuba. So, I mean, and the Dominican Republic is right there as well, and Haiti and Jamaica, and all these Caribbean islands essentially are right there. The Bahamas. I mean, and America has essentially been colonizing or terrorizing that entire strait, or the British have been doing that for the past few centuries, and it's not getting any better. So, like I was saying before, I mean, even more of this context, the fact that the labeling of independent movements is being labeled as terrorism, the fact that sedition is being dedicated as such, yet the United Nations protects it, and then our own federal documents of independence are kind of, sort of intrinsic, but kind of, sort of not really, even though the Second Amendment we've gone over this, but let's just get the verbiage again. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I mean, it can be loosely interpreted to be also to prevent a tyrannical state takeover. But of course, the actual verbiage is the security of a free state, right? So that would be empowering the state. So it's pretty shocking and galling that the United States has engaged in the very things that it purports to protect and defend against, and formed its the basis for its own independence. So, like I said, and I wasn't ignoring you, pop culture. I was just letting Oshun speak. They used colonial British control treatment on them, but worse, which is very true, and not allowed to fly their own flag. Exactly. It's and of course you're going to hear like all of the southern states say, well, if I can't fly my Confederate flag, you're infringing on my rights, and so on and so forth. It's like, okay, but that flag was actual sedition, whereas the Puerto Rican flag was, national identity. And to your point, Oshun, evidently Puerto Rico and the Philippines were independent nations before they were granted their independence by the kindness of America, which is insane to me. I, again, was not aware of that. I was aware that the Philippines obviously became its own country after World War II. I have Philippine heritage. My grandfather was stationed in the Philippines. So at some point between him and me coming around, we were still clearly over there in a very real way. And okay, thank you for that, pop culture. So, clearly my views and opinions on Puerto Rico and U.S. territories have been very naive, or at the very least with rose-colored glasses. The idea being, if we can issue statehood to the however many territories, I think there's around 11 territories, and the 11 indigenous tribes, that's 22 states. That's 44 senators and at least 22 congresspeople being added to Congress. Surely that will have some sort of major impact on our political processes in a way that won't detrimentally impact our society in the future and give these downtrodden populations an actual voice in the government that has blatantly and belligerently stood on their throats for decades, in some cases centuries. So I still would advocate for it, even knowing now what I know now. But I think the option and opportunity for true independence should also be considered, for the same reason that the United States has put the boot on the throat of these countries, of these territories, of these protected sovereign peoples for decades and centuries, and now the opportunity could potentially arise to actually truly have independence, and to deny that opportunity outright and say, well, either you stay the way you are or you become a state, that would be disingenuous. I think that third option of becoming an independent sovereign nation can and should be a strong consideration. So I just want to apologize in advance. So I think now the debate will be less of a debate and more of a discussion. Also, real quick, I'll just read what Pop Culture wrote here. Why do they not want us to know this information? Are they afraid of change for the better? Are they afraid that people will hate this country? That this is the same country who has parents who are free and clear to have their kids know what they did was bad so they can change for the better? It's all in the news. Why bury it? Well, that's the thing, right? As soon as the propaganda and the empire gets challenged and that veneer starts to crack, the entire thing starts crumbling down. I mean, that's why the show House of Cards is called a House of Cards. Because the corruption in government is literally that. It is so fragile that one tipping point is enough to bring it down, which is why leftist organizations have been fractured and fragmented and pushed and prodded and pulled away and every other thing under the sun, and why independence movements are being treated as terrorist organizations. Which is why somebody like me advocating for support and independence or statehood in true equity is just as much of a threat to the regime of America as the independence movements themselves. And it's one of the many contributing factors to the weakness of leftist movements in America, because there's no cohesion among them, because they're always infiltrated or destroyed from without. I am the government. Well, buddy, you're in the wrong stream. Let me tell you, right? Meow. I guess I'm going to be put on a... what was that? What was that called again?
La carpeta.
Carpetas? Yeah, a la carpetas. All right, you redeemed a spin the wheel, although I will spin the wheel, but I don't think we're finished yet with the topic. Is there anything you would like? For instance, Oshun, obviously part of the conversation is, I mean, you could probably sit here and take the whole stream and talk about the atrocities America committed against Puerto Rico. So, but as someone who has a background in history of Puerto Rican independent movements and so on and so forth, where do you fall under the discussion of independence versus state versus what have you? I'm already on your enemies list. Sorry. True Steele's being a goober.
So I am for Puerto Rican independence. The problem is what was discussed in the video, that because the independence movement have been so suppressed, a lot of Puerto Ricans are not, because they don't, first of all, they don't know the history, and also what he was saying, the man towards the end, about how they're afraid to lose the funding from the federal government. But at the same time, a lot of Puerto Ricans don't want to be a state either, because there's things that we have right now. For example, Puerto Rico has its own team at the Olympics. Puerto Rico has its own team in all of the Latin American games, like for example in baseball and stuff like that. When we have boxing matches, they play the Puerto Rican anthem because Puerto Rico is its own country. In Miss Universe, we have our own representative. Like all those kinds of things are things that and also for example, of course, the language, the culture, a lot of it they feel like it would be completely lost if it would become like another Hawaii or Florida. That's what a lot of Puerto Ricans are afraid of. So that's the problem, right? In general in Puerto Rico, and this has been happening since I was a kid in the 80s. I remember hearing these conversations. Puerto Ricans do want, because when we were actually a Spanish colony, the Spaniards had already given Puerto Rico representation in their parliament. So they actually have a vote in their parliament. Meanwhile, in the United States, what we have is a representative in the Congress, but the representative doesn't get a vote. They just get to basically tell Congress what opinions Puerto Rican, they get to ignore it.
Well, and that's the thing, because the Cherokee and I believe the Sioux Nation also have representatives in Congress. I don't know if the Iroquois do. How many First Nations have representatives in Congress? I don't know how many it is.
Puerto Rico has just one.
It might be. So this bill requires that each U.S. territory be represented in Congress by a non-voting delegate to the Senate who shall be elected by the people qualified to vote for officials of the territory. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, and that's literally goes right back to no taxation without representation. And we are literally taxing these territories and not giving them literally representation. They're just getting honorary token positions. So that's ridiculous. And as it turns out, it looks like there are only 5 delegates. One for DC, one for the Virgin Islands, one for Guam, one for Samoa, and one for the Northern Mariana Islands. A resident commissioner represents Puerto Rico. So not even
That's what we have, yes.
a delegate. Right. So So your stance is independence, but the people themselves, after decades and decades and decades of just wanton slaughter and suffering and tyranny and oppression and brainwashing and all this, that, and the other, are like, no, please don't take away Big Brother, because Big Brother give us at least enough to survive. Don't take that away from us because we can't survive on our own. And so and independence might actually be more complicated because the people wouldn't actually, unfortunately, be able to handle that right away, even though perhaps a government could. So like an elected body probably could, but the people wouldn't be mentally or emotionally prepared to be an independent nation state. Despite, like you said, in international competition, they are represented as their own entities.
Yeah, and also, I think, well, Puerto Rico, what happened, they don't actually pay federal taxes, but they get other taxation. For example, we get double tax for any goods that come into Puerto Rico. That's something that I'll talk to you about later, because that's something that we need to get rid of. But and that's actually one of the reasons why goods that go to Puerto Rico are extremely expensive. And like I was appalled when I was there the last few times to realize that the prices in Puerto Rico are as expensive for most stuff. I mean, maybe the rent is a little cheaper, but everything else is pretty much about the same price. But they only pay people like $9 an hour. So it's like, and everything is basically New York prices. Everything goes. So that's one of the reasons why. But so the excuse that the United States has is that Puerto Rico doesn't actually get taxed. So it's not taxation representation because they don't pay actual federal income tax, but they do pay taxes to the United States in other ways.
So, Lady Chaos, you definitely redeemed something comical during a very heavy topic of conversation, but, you know, that's okay. That's the beauty of a stream and randomness. It was also an expensive redemption, so it's not like you just redeemed it on a whim. But yes, Oshu and I are discussing Puerto Rico and the basically the atrocities that America committed against them for their entire existence, starting with Spain and then, of course, the United States. Of course, my policy was to grant them statehood for the obvious reasons, but also naively because I wasn't aware of the depth of corruption and oppression that the United States has foisted upon the Puerto Rican people.
Another thing that Puerto Ricans are a little bit afraid of as well is because right now, even with being a common, there's a lot of Americans, for example, moving to Puerto Rico, and it's driving housing prices high, like so high that I saw an interview of this old man. He was like in his 70s, and he said that he hasn't found a place where he can live and afford in the 76 municipalities of Puerto Rico. There's not one that where he can afford to live, and that makes it very difficult when you're in an island, because where are you going to go? Like here, I could drive to New Jersey, I could drive somewhere else, but where do you go when you live in an island if you can't? And he was actually he was about to get evicted from his house, and he was in Social Security, and he was saying, how can they make it that we can't even afford to, live in our own place when we're on Social Security? So it was, so that's one of the things. And another thing is now, Puerto Ricans, one of the laws in Puerto Rico is that all the beaches are public. And the Americans have been fighting against that, and they're trying to privatize the beaches. And like, that's another thing that a lot of Puerto Ricans are afraid of, that if it becomes a state, that all that stuff will start happening, and that more Americans will move in, will just make it worse, and all of them will have to start moving over here.
So, I mean, but that brings up a point, not to cut you off. That is exactly what happened after that. Not the most recent hurricane, but there was a devastating hurricane that just decimated a lot of the real estate in Puerto Rico, and American real estate businesses were just trying to gobble it all up. The fact that the discussions are happening for privatization of beaches, which of course we're seeing how the privatization of everything in America is helping Americans suffer. I can obviously understand why Puerto Ricans would be very, very concerned about that influence.
So basically, the problem with Puerto Ricans right now is that they're afraid of independence because they've been so brainwashed, but at the same time, they're afraid of losing the few advantages of being part of the United States.
Right.
So they're afraid of being a state, but they're also afraid of being independent. A lot of people, even my dad, who was a college professor, my dad was, not because he was my dad, but everybody says a very well-informed, extremely smart man. He didn't know a lot of the stuff that I found out just a few years ago because I've been doing my own research. But it's so it's it's kind of like the whole situation with Israel and Palestine, how there's not one easy solution for the problem, and everybody has a different solution that they think would be the best. But like some people say the two-state solution, other, of course I don't agree with that, but a lot of very well-meaning people think that would be the best solution, and it's kind of the same thing with Puerto Rico and its status, and even Puerto Ricans themselves have a hard time deciding exactly what they want, just because Puerto Rico has not basically been independent since 1493. Puerto Ricans don't know what it is. Like, Puerto Rico was fighting for its independence from Spain at the same time as Cuba, but the Cubans got their independence and Puerto Rico got crushed at the same time. Like they were. That's why the Puerto Rican and the Cuban flag look so similar. Is because they came up with it at the same time, and but Cubans actually were able to fight the Spaniards and get their independence, but the Puerto Ricans got crushed. So Puerto Rico has basically a history of being crushed under colonial powers. So it's just Yeah, it's just difficult, and it's very sad for the island because I would love to live in the. Leah wanted to move to Puerto Rico when we went to visit. She
We
loves
don't
Puerto
doubt
Rico.
it.
She was finding everybody jobs. It's beautiful. The people are so nice, like some of the nicest people you will ever meet.
Yeah.
But you really can't live there. Like I like just visiting there. It was like I was like, yeah, there's no way because I didn't say this to Leah, of course, because she's a child and I don't want to crush her dreams. But if we live in the place that she liked, that cute live, we wouldn't be able to afford that. That's
Right.
not a place that we could afford to live.
Well,
You
and
know.
not only that, I mean, you have American real estate investors and other corporate entities purposely driving the costs up so Puerto Ricans themselves can't stay in the city or the island and are forcing them out of the prime real estate where they've probably lived for generations. So, I mean, it is certainly insidious. So, everything that you have said is 100% valid, right? The issue is correct, is that if statehood is granted by for the lack of a better word, a benevolent administration with a benevolent Congress, that doesn't mean that in 4 or 8 years, the exact opposite will happen. So all of these activities, right, all of these actions, whether it's independence, which has its own threats and risks, or statehood, which again has its own risks, requires a fundamental shift in social activity in terms of political engagement and social empathy. Because if we as a country simply embraced or accepted or added to our union the 22 states I mentioned, actually there's not that many. How many let me Google that. How many US territories are there? 16. Holy shit. And only 5 get represented in Congress? That's even worse. Okay. So let's just say
Sorry.
So let's just say there are 16 territories, which includes Puerto Rico, Guam, and Northern Marinara Islands, American Samoa, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So 16 plus the 11 indigenous tribes, that's 27 states. That would be over half of the union. I think if we could grant statehood to over half of the union, that might be enough. That might be enough to actually sway U.S. policy forever. So, but the problem is, in order to become a state, how to become ratified as a state in the U.S. Hold up. State ratification is an amendment may be proposed by 2/3 votes of both House and Congress, or if 2/3 of the Senate request one, by a convention called for that purpose. The amendment must then be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislators, or 3/4 of conventions called in each state for ratification. So, not only would it be the Senate and the House, or hold on, that was an amendment. Hold on, sorry, I read the wrong thing. Official admission to the Union requires Congress to draft and the President to sign a bill called an Enabling Act. For Puerto Rico to become a state, it would need to convince Congress and the President that statehood is not only in the best interest of the Puerto Rican people, but in the best interest of the United States as a whole. The U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives would need to approve the statehood admission by a simple majority vote, though some members of Congress want to raise that threshold to 2/3. Okay, so constitutional ratification is the 2/3 of the House and 3/4 of states. That being said, still a simple majority in the Congress in of itself is a pretty tall order in today's politics, let alone ratifying 27 states that would go diametrically against the established power structure. So it's probably a pipe dream for one, but for two, it would require a completely shifted Congress and Senate in general, which would actually be it would be a 4-year cycle. The first cycle in which I would become president and getting all 1/3 of the senators to be under my administration policy platform, and as many members of the House as possible. And then 2 years into my presidency, the next third of the Senate would be up for election, and we would need to get at least half of them 2/3. It's some weird math, but we would need to get a majority of that third so that we could get the simple majority, 50% plus 1, plus the congressional seats, to actually ratify all 27 territories and indigenous tribes. But I think if we were able to do that, the statehood option would be better, because then you've diametrically changed the face of the nation, and you've increased the power dynamic to all these other newly minted states and territories, and includes indigenous people, and includes Puerto Ricans, and includes people who were basically colonies and being treated as worse. Giving all of those people with the power of senators and the power of congressmen that much more vote and influence in the electoral process. I don't know if the population would matter that much. Like, I don't know that, because I think it's already counted in the US Census, but the ability to represent in Congress, like that rural states in the center of America where there aren't very high populations, but they still each get 2 senators and 1 congressperson, and that's why we have an extremely conservative government. I think playing the same game, but with extremely left-leaning states who want to exercise their rights, I think that would be a phenomenal pathway forward for statehood, but that's what it would take. So I guess to bring it back to our discussion point, I recognize now that statehood would require an all-in type deal rather than sprinkling in Puerto Rico, sprinkling in Guam, sprinkling in, one territory at a time over the course of a century or something. It's got to be all at once so that the momentum of that ratification ensures that the corruption of today cannot persist into tomorrow. What do you think about that?
Something interesting. Well, one of the issues is that Puerto Rico would probably want reassurances that they can keep their language.
Sure.
And
No. So let's be clear. Granting of statehood means you become a state with your own governor, your own state state guard, your 2 senators, and your at minimum of 1 congressperson, right? Those guarantees ensure that your own heritage or such, like language and all that, because the official language of the United States might very well be English, but you're not disallowed from speaking Spanish. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, but for example, they see what happened to Hawaii, where that's not really the case,
True, and that again requires. That's why I'm saying it's kind of a pipe dream. I'm not arguing that. I'm saying that it would require an altruistic administration with an altruistic Congress to pull it off. But once it's pulled off, then, Hawaii's culture, Florida's culture, Alaskan culture, right? Texarkana culture, right? Because Mexico was all the way up until what? Oregon? Damn near Washington, I think. So the Mexican Empire and heritage went all the way through Texas, all the way, I believe, to Oregon. I don't know if it made it all the way to Washington, but it certainly, I'm fairly certain, made it to Oregon, because I know California was part of Mexico during that part of the history. So, being able to reinstate heritage and culture, again, if all of these indigenous tribes had their territories turned into state borders, then they would have the authority to be like, no, you cannot build here. You have no permits because the governor, i.e. us, said no. That kind of deal. So I think the states being able to then ratify their own constitutions, and also being able to enshrine those ideas, those thoughts, those policies, those ideologies. Because again, the Hawaiian Constitution was not written by the Hawaiian Republic or Kingdom. It was written by Americans, right? The conquerors, the colonizers. So again, those 27 states and the 54 additional senators, would force A, the 2-party system to actually work with them, and then B, it would actually require a total of 3 major powers to actually work together to accomplish goals. So I think what it does is enforce and empower democracy for at least a generation. Obviously, corruption is a thing, so during that generation, the work needs to be done to shift the ideology of American politics as far to the left as humanly possible, and then empower it into the hands of the people rather than the states and corporations. So, to your point, I guess, because it's a valid concern, would people be able to maintain their heritage and their ethnicity and their language and their culture and all that makes them them? Ideally, yes. But of course, this whole discussion is clearly an idealism, because even offering independence would be an act of Congress to be passed and ratified, which is probably a pipe dream in of itself too, because why do we have 16 territories? For military purposes, right? Because if you look at most of those, they're islands that are right off the coast of South America within spitting distance of Central America. So it's imperialism to keep those countries in check. And then there's the island hopping that allows you to gain access to Africa, Europe, and Asia. So I get why they exist from a military strategic standpoint, but from an ethical standpoint, they need to be given the choice and the opportunity and the right to either be independent or become states. It also kind of falls apart if those 27 nations and territories split and say some want to be independent and others want to be states. That power loss may be not as impactful as it otherwise could be. So if for instance only Puerto Rico became a state and the other 26 decided to be independent nations, then unless they form a coalition, then what are they going to do, right? So there's a whole lot of issue that comes up, right? There's a whole lot of geopolitical problems and concerns and crises that could emerge. But I think the best possible outcome for the 27 is if they all chose to become states and could then force a true third of Congress to listen, right? And actually, I'm sorry, force the other 2/3 of Congress to listen and be forced to work with them and actually cater to their ideology rather than the other way around.
Something interesting that I found out a couple of years ago when I was doing research about Albizu Campos and about Puerto Rico being independent in 1898 was that there's a small movement in Puerto Rico that is for going back to being a Spanish colony. Because they said we were better off as a Spanish colony, that the Spaniards actually treated us better than the United States. So I thought that was pretty funny though, because I was like, why would you want to go back to that? Like that tells you so there's people that are like, okay, we don't like what the United States is doing, but we're scared of being independent. So why don't we go back to being a colony of another? I mean, at least I guess Spain at this time, like now, it's not as dangerous as being an American colony because they don't really do anything.
Yeah,
it would be more of an economic thing. Like it's not like like Spain is going to wars and all that kind of thing, because that's one of the problems in Puerto Rico too. Is that Puerto Ricans still, like a lot of them enlist in the military, and then they end up being some of the first ones to be sent to war and that kind of thing. But yeah, but I thought that was pretty funny that some Puerto Ricans actually want to go back to being a Spanish colony, because they said that the other thing is that they were thinking, which is also hilarious, that maybe Spain would decide to make Puerto Rico part of Spain, and they wouldn't have to worry about losing its culture, because that's where we got a lot of it from, was from being a Spanish colony. So, but I think that's pretty ridiculous too. So yeah.
Well, it was kind of like when Trump got elected and all of the memes about Queen Elizabeth saying, well, the colonies are acting up again, it's time to take them back. You know what I mean? So, and Americans were like, you know what? At this point, you may as well. I mean, we can't do worse than Trump, so may as well go back to being merry old England. We're still going to drink coffee, and we're still going to look you dead in the eyes when we pour tea in the harbor. But beyond that, I mean, we'll take it, right? So... No, but I mean, those are all very valid concerns, right? Spanish, of course, Catalonia, and Screwballinger, welcome to the stream. No problems being late. You joined at a perfect time. And Princess Kayla, at least Spain has universal healthcare, right? There's that too. But it's just like with Catalonia, Spain, they were trying to get independence from Spain. So it's like a lot of these nations who have been busy, colonizing and forming and this, that, and the other, are also beginning to fragment because of this idea of independence, of these movements of sovereignty, And of course, the fact that neoliberalism and globalism has largely backfired on humanity because it's being ran by, guess what? Corporations and capitalism, which we are learning as a species is detrimental to our survival. Now, obviously, curbing capitalism would solve a lot of people's problems, whether or not there's territories or independence or sovereignties. But it definitely contributes to the idea of independence and sovereignty, because the less of control capitalism can have over our decisions, the better, right? Because if Puerto Rico was a nation, they could dictate the terms that businesses would have to do business in their country. Now, as a state, you still have that authority to a slightly lesser degree, right? You're still an American state, but in the state, you can determine things like minimum wage. You can determine things like unions. You can determine the thing like taxes, right? And when and where you can do business, when and how you can do business, where and how you can do business, right? These lands are not acceptable. These lands are. But the problem with capitalism is the second it sinks its grubby little mitts into something, it starts corrupting. Like you said, at least she's the one not corrupt politician in Puerto Rico. So how many politicians are in Puerto Rico that are currently corrupt, that are very pro-America, that are still carrying out the colonization of decades, well, actually, at this point, centuries? So the risk is if statehood was granted during the current regime of American political ideology. The only way for that to change, the only way for statehood to function for the 27, and I'm just going to start referring to them as the 27, is if there's a fundamental political and power shift in America that will, A, hold capitalism accountable, but also hold the corruption in U.S. Congress accountable so that we can actually start working towards these common goals. Otherwise, it's just, it's just going to backfire, like you said. It's only going to make things worse because, I mean, look at the fact that New York is turning purple, that California might be turning purple, that there are these diehard blue states that are starting to turn purple because of citizen dissatisfaction with the status quo of life, which part of it has to do with government corruption, but most of it is due to capitalism's influence on our society and not being regulated and not being held accountable and not being held in check. Our government our government's failure to do those things is what's driving civil unrest. But instead of, addressing that issue of weak government or ineffective government and voting for their own candidates that actually care about the people, they are rebelling and I shouldn't say rebelling. They are, They are turning their back on elected officials and turning towards an ideology that is at least speaking to those issues, which unfortunately happens to be conservatism and alt-right nationalism. So, bit of a tangent, but the main thing is your concerns are absolutely valid if that statehood was granted during this era of American politics. But under a Ronan administration, and presumably a Congress in support of my platform, it might be better. It might actually turn out well. But again, that's making the decision on behalf of the 27, which, as I am clearly becoming more and more aware of, is part of the problem. White man is going to make decisions for us. Like, that's not okay.
Well, the other thing that for me is that with the First Nations, it makes sense for them to be a state because they're already here in the mainland. But Puerto Rico just doesn't make sense because it would be like Venezuela all of a sudden being a state. Like, why?
Why not? It's the United States of America.
Here.
Venezuela's America.
Or Mexico all of a sudden becoming a state. It's just.
Then we can stop the cartels. All you're doing is making great points. But seriously, no, you again, I'm not saying statehood is good because of reasons. I'm saying statehood gives these entities power that they otherwise wouldn't have. But it goes back to voting, right? It's the same thing with the leftist. Collectivism is where the power is at. If only Puerto Rico became a state, then they would just be buried, right? Their voices would literally be buried. their 2 senators would be in the news, and then the next election cycle they'd be replaced because Puerto Ricans would be upset with them, and then it would just be a cycle of the same nonsense that we're seeing now. But to Screwballinger's several points here, Georgia's turning purple, which is fine. That's great. Obviously, red states turning less red is always a good thing. And look at what happened to Hawaii, which is true. Hawaiians are begging people to stop coming to Hawaii to put an end to the vacation industry, the travel industry. And of course, you got billionaires buying Hawaiian land and putting bunkers on them to avoid getting eaten once the revolution comes to America, right? So you're not wrong, and it's already happening in Puerto Rico. It's already happening. It's in the process of happening. As Oshun said, it's impossible to live there for a regular person because of the rising cost of living and property values. So I am not discounting that as a real possibility of being a problem under current circumstances. So my advocacy for statehood is with the assumption that it's a Ronan presidency with a Congress that is amicable to my platform and not going to be diametrically opposed to it. Does that make sense? And independence really only works too for the same reasons. If these 27 become independent, but then can't engage in trade with other nations, then they're just going to come back and be like, well, we'll be a state now, and then get denied and be like, well, you can become a territory again and get even treated worse. And that would be my concern, is that becoming an independent state would lead to the inevitability of a retracement to territory status. And the Electoral College. The Electoral College is built into the Constitution, so it would take a constitutional amendment to get rid of it. On principle, I am against the Electoral College. Again, we should have ranked choice voting and for every single level of office, and popular vote should determine the presidency regardless. And the fact that that's not the case is a major problem and has led to 2 of the worst administrations in American history, the Bush administration and the Trump administration. We wouldn't have had a single... and we wouldn't have had a single Republican president in the past 20 or 30 years unless it had been for the Electoral College, because the popular vote has always gone to the Democratic, blue, liberal, whatever you want to call it, nominee. Now imagine if Gore had won the election instead of Bush. We probably wouldn't have gone to Iraq. We might have still gotten Obama, but there might have been a real opportunity for a Bernie Sanders-like individual to win, as the party would have continued to shift left instead of shifting to the right. Well, I guess shifting left instead of to the right. And the Electoral College would not benefit Puerto Rico because, again, the Electoral College counts for the number of senators and congresspeople and the governor, I think.
Puerto Rico's tiny.
And it's tiny, so they'd only get 3 votes. So no, it's got to just be the senators and congresspeople.
Yeah, but can I say something about the Electoral College? I've thought about this before, and I think there's a solution that may not need a whole what is it to like an amendment. It would be that to require that every state has a proportion. The way they do the electoral votes, it's proportionate to the popular vote in each state. For example, New York, 100 electoral college votes, but let's say that Kamala gets 60% of the vote and Trump gets 40%, then she would get 60 electoral votes and Trump would get 40. Because what happens now is most states are going with the all or nothing, and that's why it makes it that most of the states don't even count. But I think that if we at least made it proportional, it's not getting completely rid of it, but it's kind of almost making it that it goes by the popular vote. So that, and I think that probably wouldn't require a constitutional amendment because you're not getting rid of it. You're just requiring that the states don't do all or nothing, that they go proportional. And that would make every state be in play, because then my vote, for example, in New York would actually count. Like right now, well, I guess it could this election because New York is turning purple. But usually in New York, my vote doesn't even matter because it's an all or nothing state. But if it's proportional, that makes people feel like their vote actually matters, and it makes politicians realize that everybody's vote matters because they can get electoral college votes in every single state, not just the ones that are swing states. So I think that would make it that they have to listen more to the people in swing state. I mean, in every state, not just the swing states.
So to that point, that would still be an act of Congress because you'd be infringing upon states' rights to determination of how the Electoral College works. And then you would still fall under the issue of faithless delegates, who, again, this is how insidious the Electoral College is that the delegates, each party gets to pick one, but then they can just vote however they want once they're picked. Like, that makes zero sense as I'm saying it, but that's exactly how it runs. And just because the state says all or nothing or proportional or whatever means that the delegates could still be faithless. There's nothing preventing them from doing that. So if you were going to do the proportionality, the problem also runs into, say it was a 60-40 split, but there's only 3 votes, right? It's actually then going to be a 66 and 33% split, right? Which then those candidates who got the 66 would be like, hell yeah. And then the ones who got the 33 would be like, well, that's not fair, right? So you run into those issues, which is, again, why there is no real fixing of the Electoral College. Yeah, sure, you can mandate the proportionality so it does improve the thing, but the function of it itself is the problem. And somebody said it on here. It existed because it was for slave-owning states to count their population in their congressional seat house, which would then give them more Electoral College votes, which would give them a better influence in the election anyway for president. So I'm not arguing against the proportionality, but you'd have to take it a step further by also eliminating faithless delegates, making that impossible to exist, and perhaps even having the delegates themselves be an elected position or selected, because again, they're just going to have to vote as the case may be. But that's why the whole process is so convoluted, because the delegates themselves are appointed, voted on between the parties, and then it's only the 2 parties that get to pick, not even the Green Party, not even the independents. It ends up being a mess, right? So, but of course, right, the difference is you can amend it without a constitutional amendment. You can, not amend it. You can regulate it without an amendment, but it would be an act of Congress to agree on it. And why would they do that? Because that would eliminate and mitigate their power. So I think if we're going to talk about pipe dreams, we may as well get rid of it with a constitutional amendment. Ratify the 27 constitutional amendment to get rid of the Electoral College, and then hopefully this country will start healing. Maybe abolishing capitalism. I don't know. Certainly regulating industry. We need a new constitution in general. I wouldn't go that far. There's a lot of good stuff in the Constitution. It's just when you have corrupt individuals being corrupt in power and then disregarding the Constitution, that's when it's a problem, right? Because the Supreme Court creating money as free speech and that corporations are people, that has nothing to do with the Constitution. And in fact, the Constitution would imply that it was always understood that people are the only people who have the rights as people, and that corporations are entities and weren't even mentioned in the Constitution, right? So it's not like the Constitution failed us. It's that the Supreme Court was filled with corrupt individuals, and they took it upon themselves to grant rights to entities that have no business being granted those rights. I'm not arguing that, the 3/5 compromise and the Electoral College wasn't corrupt. I'm saying that the Electoral College hasn't been addressed, but the 3/5 has, and there's other things that have been addressed that were part of the Southern, requirement of being a part of the colonies. But even so, rewriting the Constitution, this man. Listen, you will obey the emperor. I mean, the president. I can do no wrong. Let's see, I like that idea. Instead of one state getting more electoral votes than other states, and that the red or blue candidate wins the entire pot based on who was in the lead state and it got finalized, everybody gets something in each state, right? Again, I'm not opposed to it. It's just, what if you have a 51% to 49% split and there's only 3 delegates, right? Somebody's going to get a disproportionate benefit, and that is going to cause its own constitutional crisis, which is why the Electoral College cannot be adjusted, because it's intrinsically disproportionate and unfair. I think they also need to change 270 if they change it to a 60-40%. Yeah, but the thing about the 270, how many Electoral College votes are there? 538, right? Because it's including DC's 3 electors. Right, because it's 435 members of Congress, 100 senators, and then 3 for DC, right? So the point is, the 270 is like damn near half. It's just over half. 538 divided by 270 is literally just under half. If anyone missed the video from the beginning of the stream, here you go. A few people did miss it, and it's always good to share that kind of information. And by the way, if we did a 60-40, most of our elections haven't been landslide victories like that. They have been 51% to 49%. So doing that would not help, unfortunately, because, again, that would require the popular vote to be taken into greater effect, rather than the Electoral College vote. And again, you can't just put them all in a pool based on math and things like that. That's unfortunately not how it works. I was out selling my GoPro for vacation money because capitalism. Yikes. Sorry to hear that, bro. Like that sucks. But that was kind of like when I had to sell my Magic the Gathering cards just so I could afford rent. So I definitely understand that. I definitely understand. So I think we're kind of transitioning away from the Puerto Rico discussion. Puerto Rico. That's going to be hard for me to adjust. I need to.
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico. No, I get it. It's just I've been colonized and I'm not saying it right. So I have to uncolonize.
I usually just say Puerto Rico, because when I say Puerto Rico, people go, I don't speak Spanish. I'm like, I'm not speaking Spanish. I'm pronouncing it properly.
You know what's funny, though, about that exact thing? It's like, you got to speak English. It's like, okay, what about Los Angeles? Sacramento? What about San Diego? What language is that?
Los Angeles means, doesn't San Diego mean Wells by vagina? That's what it means, Wells vagina.
Hey, I didn't know about all that, but I thought it was the Saint Diego or the Saint of the Day. But anyway.
It's a joke.
I see. Point being, though, that many cities in California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas are Spanish named, and people don't even pick up on that. Or like in the Midwest, a lot of cities and roads and rivers and stuff are named after First Nations and Indigenous peoples, or their terminology for things. And people are like, well, this is America. It's like, yeah, you live in Muskogee. Show me where in Muskogee, where in Britain Muskogee is. Count Muskogee. Go ahead and show me where. No? Oh, that's right, because that was the Muskogee tribe.
The word barbecue is actually a Taino word from the indigenous people of Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic and all that. Barbecue, one of the things that Americans love the most, that word is not even in English.
Right. Well, and apparently Detroit, Detroit. So here's another thing. People are saying Red Overlord won't leave office if he wins in November, and his administration is supposed to come to an end in 2029. However, he wants to give cops immunity, so if he doesn't leave, cops can force him out and not be held accountable for it. Well, yeah, sure. But that would also require the cops to force him out, which they wouldn't do because they would have been given unprecedented power under his administration. So that's a non-starting issue right there. Him refusing to leave office is also an unrealistic possibility because he's getting old and he's not living a healthy lifestyle. He's probably not going to live to be 2029. Or to get to 2029. So before we get even more derailed, Oshun, do you have any closing arguments, thoughts, history do you want to provide us on Puerto Rico?
No, I think we've covered everything.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, then on that note, thank you for joining the stream in this way. Obviously, you're always in the stream, but, participating in it, I should say. Well, directly, you know what I mean. Thank you for being an official guest.
I appreciate it.
Everybody give Oshun a round of applause. She did a really great job. She didn't destroy this colonizer or this ignorant imperialist, I guess. I don't know. At least you can say this on my behalf, is that I ideally want to do what's best for those 27, but I want them to make that decision for themselves. My thinking is one thing, and their wants and needs is a completely another, but I would respect either. I'm just thinking logically, the 27 coming together as brand new minted states all at once could do a significant power change in America overnight, and that's what I value. That's what I envision. But for them, they might be like, well, screw you, America. This is your problem. We want no part of it. So on that note,
I know that you're open-minded, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. So on that note, Oshun is speaking of voice appearances. Oshun is going to start being my what would that be, like a tech support in a way. She's going to be yelling at me when we play games, like when we're in that portion of the stream, to pay attention to chat, because I've noticed something. It's really easy to engage in chat when you're looking at the camera, when you're looking at chat, when you're looking at the video, doing all these things. But it's very difficult to look at chat when you're looking at a game and you're focused on that, and the game is completely unrelated to anything that might be happening in chat or in the politics, right? So it's helping me stay focused until either my ADHD or autism brain can start fixing itself. So, I mean, we can pretty much stay in this voice channel, Oshun. But before we do that, we are going to get into the game. We're going to start playing Age of Empires 4. It's going to be my first time playing the game. It's going to be the channel's first time, obviously, being into the game. And we're going to achievement whore this entire time. That's what we're going to do. And then after we're done achievement whoring in Age 4, we're going to do Age 1, and then we're going to do Age 3. I know that's not in order, but it is in order of popularity. Age 2 being the number 1. Arguably, Age 1 is more popular, but I haven't quite figured out how the Xbox thingy works with it yet, whereas with Age 4, it worked pretty well. But we're going to do a quick break because we covered a lot of ground in those 2 hours, and yeah, let's stretch our legs, grab some chips, do what we got to do, all right?
Calling
By the way, did
all
that...
New Hampshire residents. Are you eligible for the Pell Grant and thinking about college this fall? The CCSNH Promise program makes it possible. That's right, no college tuition for Pell-eligible students. That's tuition-free at all of New Hampshire's community colleges. Whether you choose part-time, full-time, online, or in-person, this fall, focus on your future, not the cost. Visit ccsnh.edu/promise and get started today. Conditions apply.
With Walmart, I can express my style on campus at prices I love. So I can rock denim on denim to class, a preppy skirt to the park, then go for bold patterns at night, just like any cowboy coastal grandma preppy girl would.
Create your style with Walmart. Look at your cup holder. It's empty, and you're feeling thirsty. Head to a nearby convenience store and fill it with a Pepsi Zero Sugar, Mountain Dew, or Starry. Grab a delicious, refreshing Pepsi for the road.
All right, I'm back. And you're right. We do have a wheel spin to get to. So, my bad. I actually remembered as I was walking away. So, this way it's not as fuzzy. That was a really good spin. Alright. So, that says industry with my terrible handwriting. Maybe I need a different color marker or something. I think I used red, but it still doesn't show up very well. We'll work on that. So industry is the policy that we just spun. And as we just got done talking about Puerto Rico and how capitalism is literally gutting the nation through that not unelected board of appointees by American government, which is probably full of lobbyists and other nonsense. I think it's safe to say that industry needs to be heavily regulated, starting with the revocation of Citizens United. We 1,000% need to get rid of Citizens United. Money is not free speech, and corporations are not people. They never were people. They never will be people because they are corporations. They are entities, they are organizations of a multitude, to be sure, but having that much power and authority and the same rights as an individual doesn't even make sense. That's another valid point. Abolish for-profit health insurance companies. Not only this, most industries that deal with utilities and housing and other basic necessities should not exist as private entities. Our water shouldn't be privatized. Our electricity shouldn't be privatized. Our gas shouldn't be privatized. Of course, we should be moving to a different technology altogether, but that's not the point. Our land shouldn't be privatized. Our crops shouldn't be privatized. And our housing shouldn't be privatized, right? Housing is a human right, and it should not be a for-profit engagement enterprise whatsoever. Same thing with healthcare, same thing with education. And I would even argue that job training, such as in trades or just regular on-the-job training, should be free and accessible as well, and not for profit. And childcare should 1,000% not be for profit, because how are you going to have an economy or a nation that continues to grow, having families and children, if those families cannot even afford to have those children? So it defeats the purpose, in my opinion, to make childcare A, private, and B, so ridiculously expensive that it precludes people from having children anyway. Oh, and by the way, women's body autonomy. The right to choose, that we can't have that. And of course, that's driven through corporations and Christian nationalism. So, the fact that and how many articles have there been recently about price gouging and surge pricing? The fact that gasoline has been surge pricing forever, and now other companies are trying to do it. Wendy's, Walmart, etc. We cannot allow corporations to continue to get away with literally extorting the consumers, the working class of America, while taking our tax dollars, forcing poverty upon the masses, and forcing them to have food stamps and everything else instead of paying them fair wages. Private industry has failed the American people in every way, form, and fashion that it possibly could. But we're told that because the stock market go up, America go good. That's not okay. Let's execute for some corporations. All this talk of PR made me want to eat Puerto Rican food. I'm eating tostones with an avocado salad. In Michigan, when you drive through the farmland, you see corporate logos everywhere, which is disturbing because the same thing's true in Ohio. Don't forget private education. Yep, I don't think we did. But if I did miss it, obviously education needs to be free and public as well. Every institution, and there should be no private education institutions either. We need to be like Finland. Everybody goes to public school, and every university is public. I don't care. I don't care. Speaking of that, they set up AI to collect people's payments here to pay for gas and stuff, and because of the global tech outage, that AI took more money than it was supposed to for the company, and they won't refund that money that they were not supposed to take. And again, they're not going to be held accountable unless they get sued, which means that legal process could take 5, 10, 15, 20 years before anybody even starts seeing some money because, again, corruption and a lack of regulation, which thanks to the Supreme Court, not the same Supreme Court that allowed for Citizens United, but the same mindset that got rid of the Chevron doctrine. So now these agencies, these federal regulators, can't enforce their mandate, which is a problem. It needs to be the opposite. In Norway, all childcare places are public, and the cost is on a sliding scale. They can't cost more than 8% of the household income, which I think that's still steep. I'd say 8% of income is still steep, but significantly better than the $1,500 a month, no matter what you make in America, per child, no less. And aid to countries that hate us. So that's getting into more of, I would call that more a race. Like, I'm not calling you out on this. I'm saying that that's more of a dog whistle. Countries hate us, and we're giving aid to them because U.S. foreign policy is bombing them, but by giving aid to them, it makes us look like the good guys. So what we really need to do is end foreign, policy of conquest and colonization. In Norway, all schools and universities are public as well. Private schools should all be ended. It's just a scam. It is. And the quality of education at these private institutions is less than public education in, I don't remember the statistic, but it was at least 40% of them. At least. If I sent Leia to childcare, it would have cost me 75% of my salary, right? So, I mean, it's just egregious, the costs that are involved. And yes, corporations need to be held accountable. Now, should every corporation be made public? No. Things like, pens, mice, computers, laptops, cars. Maybe not cars. That should probably be public domain too. Of course, we need a better infrastructure. High-speed rail, public flights, public air, sea, and land travel. But I think if it's entertainment, or if it's technology, or truly a luxury, then private industry can do whatever it wants. But if it's a necessity to life, then no. To include food. Right? Like, how many of these, even Lay's potato chips, how many of their factories cut corners for profit? How many of them underpay their workers for profit, right? I don't need 17 brands of the same exact potato chip. What I need is my potato chip to cost a reasonable amount of money, and the person making the potato chip to get paid a reasonable amount of money so they can live and support themselves, right? Not merely to survive, but to thrive, which was the intent of the minimum wage to begin with. And yeah, religious private schools, again, separation of church and state. You want to teach seminary, then go to a seminary school, but those institutions shall not be a part of the public education system. I love conservatives' argument about public transit and education when compared to Europe is that we are bigger. Because we're bigger, we should be investing in it more heavily. Plus, where we have our population density, we should have more public transit and means to commute in and out anyway. It makes the most sense. And besides, most of our congestion is because of our reliance on vehicles, and it's contributing to pollution, it's contributing to global warming, it's contributing to, well, the toxic work environment, and many other things. And we keep needing to build more roads and expanding the lanes when we could just be building roads. Or, trains and railway. That would reduce traffic. My dad wasn't as much of a commie as me, but he always said that anything that is needed to survive should be free. Which is true. As Europe doesn't have a system that connects all of it. But the thing is, Europe does have a system that connects all of it. Europe is very interconnected with both high-speed rail systems and regular rail. So unless you meant something else. Oh, okay. Then I must have misunderstood the way you wrote that. Mea culpa. And honestly, I get it. People are well, potato chip companies shouldn't have to be public domain because that's a luxury. You don't have to eat potato chips to live. Okay. Food, in general, should be public domain. Does that mean everybody needs to eat Wagyu steak and caviar? No. Does that mean everybody wants to eat chips? Absolutely not. But having it in the public domain means it'll be well regulated with extremely high quality and people will get paid. They will have benefits and they will have opportunities. And when I say publicly owned it, I mean publicly owned it. I mean that the workers own it publicly. Now, I might have to phrase it slightly different, or I might have to improve my understanding of what public ownership means. But I would even go so far as to say that the state might have control over the industry, but all profits and domains still get split 50-50. 50% to the state, 50% to the workforce. In that way, you would dramatically reduce taxation regardless. So all of this communism, well, the state owns the means of production. Yes and no. Socialism is where the people own the means of production. That's actually what I'm leaning towards the most. So whatever you would call where the worker owns the means of the production and that there's still that split, I think that would be the healthiest result for industry in general. And no one should starve, absolutely. Healthy should be available to all. Exactly. It should not only be available to all, it should be, if not free, it should be ludicrously affordable. Especially since globally we produce more food than we actually consume. I think we consume or produce enough food globally for like a population of 20 billion people, and the remaining 12 billion people's worth of food just gets thrown away. And even in our own industry or our own country, ugly fruits and vegetables get thrown away instead of actually sold because they're not as marketable. That's insane to me. We are literally throwing away food because it's ugly for aesthetic reasons. That's insane. Best way to lower pollution and spread wealth are the same. Eat a billionaire. Can we compost them? Well, to the point that what's currently happening with our economy is not working. And it's not working for the American people. It's obviously working as intended, which is to enrich and empower those with the capital. That's the whole point of capitalism. Corporations hold the means of production. Communism, the state holds the means of production. Socialism, the people hold the means of production. I truly believe that the means of production being controlled by the people, but splitting those profits to the people and the state respectively, and cutting out the industry entirely from the decision-making process or its existence as a whole, right? Reducing industry to being between the state and the people, I think that is how you resolve a lot of our social and economic issues. If a stranded soccer team can do it, I can try. Wow. Wow. And also, wow, Anna. I'm not reading that. Delete comment. And after all that, pop culture hasn't commented at all. And I spun the wheel for him. Wow. Rude. I gave the people what they wanted. I thought the brain was... maybe it is. Well, I guess the brain is an organ. I don't know. Game capture is not capturing. Awkward. Still not capturing. I wasn't expecting this to be a problem. There we go. Really? Perfect. New music, exactly. Gotta run out to pick up prescriptions. Have a wonderful evening, all. So the interesting thing about Age of Empires 4 is that you have daily challenges and experiences. So I don't know what these ranks or these experience levels do, but I guess we're gonna find out because we're gonna be completing some of these by default. In a match. See, and I think the match requires you to do a skirmish. Or the camp. Maybe it, and I think that would have to be a skirmish. And that's pretty interesting. Then there's the Art of War, which we haven't done yet. Not sure if we are gonna do that yet. Might do that once I get used to actually playing the game. And figuring out all the controls and stuff. And then we got a few campaigns. And apparently I don't have all the DLC. How much is it? $15? Well, damn. Recent reviews, only 18. All reviews, 1,300. So not very many people have even bought this DLC. But the price is disappointing. There is no documentary film included with the DLC, which pretty much made the base game campaigns. Maybe if it goes on sale. Paid factions that should have been in the base game, plus a crappy campaign. Basic campaign without documentary, which should have been in the base game. So we're not gonna hurry up and buy it. Let me finish my chips. This screen is ludicrously bright. There we go. That was ridiculous. It was like the sun in my eyeballs. Let's continue on with her videos, I think. I think that's what we do.
Get an extra large New York style one top
And of course,
for just $10.99. Only
wouldn't be one of her videos without an immediate...
We're coming up on a major fundraising deadline, and there aren't many more between now and the election. So I am...
So what if...
I'm sorry, Kamala, because I was told I need to pronounce it like Pamela instead of Kamala, or else I'll be racist. You know, never mind that she has done more to harm black people in America than, well, Biden, as it turns out. Anyway, though, that doesn't mean to be disparaging or to be rude to her. I just feel like saying Kamala seems to be whitewashing her name, rather than embracing the culture from which it came. The other thing is, I'm really concerned. How has this not scale? So it is 1600 by 900. Okay, well, the resolution sometimes impacts the actual stream bit rate. Oh no, it absolutely is dropping frames. So hold on, we need to fix this immediately. I think that's all we needed. Alright, so everything's good. Alright. I'd love to see you do audio commentary on Sam playing the game. Oh my god. Please no. I guess we'll start this mission. Select the campaign difficulty. This may be changed at any time from the pause menu. Well, that's a new one. I wonder, though. Is this not going to show up? What the hell? Why isn't the Steam client showing up? I wanted to look at the achievements. I guess we'll just go hard. I'd love to see, once he starts playing, I will read out the comments for him. You haven't hung up yet, good.
Some events leave a deep mark on history, but none on the land.
Wow, this is really nice quality video.
After almost 1,000 years, no traces of the bloody conflict can be seen.
Feel like
But
we're
here,
encroaching on
the
this.
fate of England turned. It's where a king was killed, and his victor claimed the throne.
Mind, I guess. That's nice scenery. Yeah.
October 14th, 1066.
No, this is an actual documentary. This
We
isn't.
know what happened here on this day, thanks to this. The Bayer Tapestry. A carefully preserved, illustrated record of events. William claimed the previous king had promised to fight King Harold for the throne. Thwarted his plans. Meanwhile, Harold discovered that a Viking invasion had landed in the north. Another threat to his crown. So he raced to fight them. In France, William waited for the right conditions to sail across the Channel to England.
Is this William the Conqueror?
The weather cleared. He seized
William
his chance.
Wallace was Scottish.
250 miles north, Harold had defeated the Vikings. Now, hearing of William's arrival, his army sped south.
This
At
is
9 o'clock in the
ridiculous.
morning, on this hill, William's Norman army were ready to do battle with Harold's Anglo-Saxon men.
Like, this is super ridiculous. Like, the little
stage was
PowerPoints that
and
Age of
up for
Empires
grabs.
2 does
England
pales in
itself.
comparison to this. And I don't even remember Age 3 having this good of scenes. Battle of Hastings, 1066. Yowza. William of Normandy began his conquest of England, but to end the Anglo-Saxon rule, he would first have to kill their king. Leader units have special abilities. Select the leader to see what they do. I thought I wouldn't like Braveheart because Mel Gibson got to be such a D-bag, but I did like it. I watched it before he became a D-bag. It's a great movie and Mel Gibson was amazing in it. Yep, this is much better. Yeah, so I wonder why people don't like playing Age of Empires 4. Is it just because of the lack of nostalgia? I guess we're about to find out. Senlac Hill. Battle
On
of Hastings.
October 14th, 1066, William of Normandy stood ready for battle at the base of a hill.
Oof,
The high
uphill
ground
fighting, that
belonged to King
sucks.
Harold of England and his Anglo-Saxon army. Here, on this hilltop, the fate of England would be decided.
Attack Harold's Saxon army. Oh no. So, I can't double click. Wow, that is super fast. Huh. Yowza. Game, I think. Box drag. Oh wait, smart? What would this mean? I don't know. Interesting. We'll allow that for now. Where? Controls? Oh, control. What? What? Actual keyboard commands? That makes sense? No way. Select all units on screen? What? Okay. Idle villager? I don't know what all that means yet. We're not there yet. Wow. Enable pan on acceleration? No, we're not doing that. That's probably too fast for me. Camera mode, mouse wheel on? Sure. Oh my god, that's still so fast. Oh. Oh, that's all I have to do? Okay. Garrison, stop.
William's
Attack
Norman
move.
army made the first charge, launching a direct assault on the shield wall.
Attack speed? Alright, cool. We have abilities, folks.
Though
I love
William's army
Farming
fought
Sim
fiercely
2022.
against the shield wall, it would not yield. As one man fell, another took his place. Overlapping shields in tight formation made for a near impenetrable barrier. Realizing his army could not break the shield wall, William called for a retreat. William's feigned retreat was working. The Anglo-Saxon army broke their shield wall formation, leaving gaps for William to make a move.
Attack! For Isengard! I can do my British accent without being wrong. That's awesome. What's going on in the game? We're fighting the Battle
men
Hastings.
no longer in shield wall formation, William could pick them off as they charged.
Kill the Saxons from the shield wall. Damn. So attack move is this. Rally the troops. Increase your attack speed.
The Anglo-Saxons had deployed rows of spearmen to push back the invaders. But William had an answer.
Normal archers.
His sharp-eyed archers.
Let's go. Let's go. Sorry, I was saying that I like that we can see what's going on in the game better. Yeah, the graphics are obviously 3D and a little bit better. I'm paying attention to the stream. You don't need to yell at me yet.
More Norman men-at-arms reinforced William's army.
We're gonna bait them. Watch this, watch this.
I was saying put on the video.
What?
Put on the video.
Oh, you want the video? I thought we were all watching the game, my bad.
Because it's not its own country, but it's not a state either. So it's in this kind of limbo where it belongs to, but it's not a part of the United States. Officially, it's a commonwealth. But more and more Puerto Ricans are agreeing that's just a fancy way of saying colony.
I think that Puerto Rico at this point is a colony. America has a colony's problem.
But how is that possible? Because in the 50s, the US announced to the world that Puerto Rico had been decolonized.
It was a monumental hoax.
And that Puerto Ricans would now rule themselves. There are some who believe it was all a lie. Others defend the Commonwealth status.
You can't just say that didn't happen, it was a fallacy.
But if there's agreement on anything, is that what's happening right now is not benefiting Puerto Ricans.
This is the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Today, Puerto Rico has come into its own, a real democracy.
If you watched the previous video, you know that in this series we're talking about the status options for Puerto Rico. We already covered independence. In this video, we're talking about the middle option. But the middle option is really a range of options. let's talk about what we have today. That's the Commonwealth. In Spanish, the official name is Estado Libre Asociado. We call it ELA for short. And we can't talk about the ELA without talking about Luis Muñoz
falling
Marín.
off the screen in the most disingenuous way.
Muñoz Marín was born the same year the U.S. invaded Puerto Rico in 1898. He was the son of a famous politician, and he went into politics too. He became a senator in the 30s. What's interesting is that at this time, Muñoz Marín supported independence for Puerto Rico.
No,
But this
Jose
was also
Cadena.
the time of the Great Depression,
couldn't read
and
that
Puerto
at
Ricans
first.
were suffering extreme poverty.
Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the stream. We are playing some Age
At the
of
same
Empires.
time, that militant group I
And
told
we
you about in the
are
video about
also,
independence, the
learning about,
nationalists, they were clashing with the U.S. government in
Puerto Rican
Rico. There were a
independence
series
and,
of killings
well,
that prompted a U.S.
colonization.
senator to say, if they want independence, let's give them independence. And he proposed a bill, but some Puerto Ricans believed that bill was too harsh. One of the things they proposed was a full U.S. tariff from Puerto Rico shortly after it became independent. And the island was already struggling economically, so that would have been a huge hit. And this is where you see Muñoz Marín take a different path from his party, because his party still supported the bill. They believed their freedom from the U.S. was worth it. And the saying became, independence even if we starve. But Muñoz took a much more practical approach. He supported
I'm gonna
independence,
lose
but
because
not
I
if it
tried to
meant
go all
falling
in.
deeper into poverty. So instead, he used his connections with the U.S. government at the time of the FDR administration to bring New Deal money to Puerto Rico.
The Anglo-Saxon King Harold
But that didn't
had
come without
fallen.
strings attached. Now it was the 40s and World
In
War
the
II was in
confusion,
full swing.
some loyal
The US
soldiers
wanted
fought
to
to the
use
death,
Puerto Rico to set
while
military
others
bases.
scattered in panic.
It was during this time that the Navy took over the island of Vieques. Years later, when the
first win.
JFK administration was considering forcibly removing the entire population of Vieques, Muñoz Marín strongly advised him
Luis
against
Muñoz
it. But he
Marín
also
is
said
seen
if
as a
there was
hero
a
of Puerto
referendum
Rico.
for the
Now
Navy
I
to take
know
over
that
the
he
island,
actually sold us
he would
out.
do everything in his power to get a yes vote.
That's what I was talking about
That
earlier.
gives you an idea of the kind of
Vieques.
relationship he had with the U.S. government and why some Puerto Ricans thought he was a traitor. But to suffering Puerto Ricans who heard his promise to address poverty and improve their quality of life, he
That's one hell of a
represented hope.
victory fanfare,
And in
I might add.
1948, he became Puerto Rico's first elected governor.
Under Marín, the Puerto Ricans now have as much political freedom as any state in the Union.
He was also responsible for industrializing Puerto Rico.
It's a miracle of modern progress.
He supported policies that invited U.S. corporations to take advantage of tax cuts and cheap labor. And in return, Puerto Ricans would get jobs.
It's meant new jobs and new wealth for Puerto Rico.
It also meant huge profits for U.S. corporations and problems for Puerto Ricans down the line.
Industrialization brought the collapse of the island's agriculture as Puerto Rico went from self-sufficiency in food production to almost total dependency on the U.S. to feed itself.
Thank you, thank you.
Hey, it's JD Vance. If you can't
Oh
afford to
my
donate
God,
because
we're getting
of the
Kamala,
wreckage of Joe Biden's economy, I
Kamala,
understand and
and JD
During that period of
Vance.
time
That's
between the
gross.
New Deal programs in the 70s, there was an obvious improvement in the quality of life of everyday Puerto Ricans. There was better education, better health care. The life expectancy of Puerto Ricans went up from 46 years old to 72. But these programs also
strategic locations.
Can I pause this? Why can't I pause it?
Been seen in England before.
I wanted to
They
pause the
reminded
video
the Anglo-Saxon
that's playing right
population
there. Crap.
Exactly who was in charge.
So I can read pop culture here. We touched on this topic for about 2 seconds last stream. Vance calls Jennifer Aniston a pedophile for saying she hopes his daughter will be able to become a mom someday without having to go through in vitro for it.
King William
He said she's 2 years old, so it's creepy.
rebellions.
But,
But there
oh
was
my
one
god.
region where dissent was
Talk about
spiraling
taking
out
a
of
comment
control.
in the most disingenuous
The
way
north of
possible.
England.
We have a video about that coming up.
1069, a group of
He really
lords
does.
from Northumbria
Do we have a video about
formed
that?
an
Because
alliance with
I
Viking
apparently
invaders.
did not look and notice.
Together they approached Norman-held York,
It's not pulling
a
up.
large city with an important cathedral.
So that's
still
JD Vance
protected
childless
by
cat lady
ancient Roman
comments, or is it a
walls.
different one?
But the walls couldn't save York. The city
Okay.
and the castle fell to the rebels. William's
We'll
new
listen to that
kingdom
after we're
was
done with
under
Puerto
threat.
Rico.
He had to
Puerto
get the
Rico.
city back under Norman control. William had no choice but to order his men north. But as the Norman forces set off on their long march towards York, how much resistance from the rebels would they encounter?
You mean the terrorists, right? Because rebels are terrorists to the conquering lands, right?
Increased dependence on the U.S. So it was easier to make the case that...
Okay, I didn't want this video to clash with this video, the game video. I want to hear her uninterrupted. Chill. The power is going to her head,
separating
folks.
From the
and then there's his desire to practically criminalize women who leave red states to seek health care for their pregnancies that they can't handle, mostly because they'll die if they keep it. Yeah, there is that.
The United States was not in Puerto Rico's best interest. However, it was the 50s and it was no longer cool to own colonies. So the U.S. was starting to feel the international pressure regarding Puerto Rico. So along with Muñoz Marín, they came up with a solution where they wouldn't have to give up Puerto Rico, but also didn't have to make it a state.
Today, the flag of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico waves proudly beside Old Glory.
And this was how the Estado Libre Asociado, or the ELA, was born. Puerto Rico would remain a territory, but also have its own constitution and gain significant autonomy. This is the part where some people believe the U.S. only pretended to give up power.
Representations were made even before the United Nations that somehow Puerto Rico was now fully self-governing. But fundamentally, the relationship of colonial subordination remained intact because Congress kept full sovereignty over Puerto Rico. In other words, Congress delegated authority. That didn't mean that Congress wouldn't take back that authority it had delegated, which it actually did.
Congress took it back in 2016 under President Barack Obama.
People of Puerto Rico need to know that they're not forgotten.
You've heard me talk about this before. This is the moment the Oversight Board was created. Puerto Rico was in massive debt it couldn't pay back. And the U.S. took away its power to make its own financial decisions. Now a group of people appointed by the U.S. would make those decisions for Puerto Rico. So the argument is, if Congress could so easily say, you no longer manage your money, we're going to pick a group of people to do it for you, then Puerto Rico has always been a colony, and the Commonwealth was a fallacy. But Armando Valdez disagrees.
The fact that we are facing very serious challenges both economically and politically at this point doesn't mean that when it worked, it didn't work. It worked. The Commonwealth
that guy's
status
scum.
Worked
He's
for
like,
decades. We went from
not
being
a colony.
literally the poorhouse
It's not
of
a
the
problem.
Caribbean to being the largest
because it was
economy in
working.
all of Latin America at some point.
But now,
No,
5
that's
years
not
after
how
the
that
board was
works.
created, hundreds of schools have shut down. Puerto Ricans pay more for basic, unreliable services like water and electricity. And the population is in decline as tens of thousands leave every year in search of jobs. And Puerto Rican politicians might disagree on many things, but when it comes to the board, across parties, most agree it's colonial. So how do they plan to get out of it? That's where it gets tricky, because even within this middle option, there are different options. Let's talk about two. Some want to rescue the Commonwealth, so to speak. They believe the ELA was wonderful at some point and that through negotiating with the US, it can benefit Puerto Rico again. Others say forget it. It was never great, we need to throw it out and start over. But now from a position of power. They believe Puerto Rico needs to negotiate with the US on equal footing and enter into an agreement of free association. Now the main difference between these two options is whether Puerto Rico continues to be a part of the US or becomes its own country. The way I see it is the difference between being someone's child or someone's spouse. As someone's child, you are entitled to certain things from your parents, like their last name. In this case, we'll say that's American citizenship. You're also entitled to child support, which in this case we'll say it's federal funding. But in a parent-child relationship, it is the parents who hold the power. They have the last say. That would be Commonwealth. As someone's spouse, you can negotiate and agree to share certain things, like a last name, money, resources. But when you're on equal footing with someone else, you can decide to walk away if it no longer works for you. In that case, Puerto Rico would have the freedom it doesn't have now, but it wouldn't necessarily be entitled to some of the benefits. That would be free association. Can you briefly tell me why that's not something you support?
It implies being an independent country, the United States could back away from the pact. The United States could decide to lower the levels of funding for Puerto Rico. There are any number of issues that would be up for negotiation that are not up for negotiation right now, and that I think are very important for the people of Puerto Rico.
Now I'm going to make a quick parenthesis to say two things. Number one, that there's consensus that Puerto Ricans who are American citizens today would not lose their citizenship even if Puerto Rico were to separate from the US. It's more a question of what would happen with future generations of Puerto Ricans. And number two, that some believe the US has a responsibility to pay back after all the ways it has profited from having Puerto Rico as a colony. But that's a conversation for another video.
So, yeah, he's
What's
a
really
sellout.
important
PLA
for
was
people
never
who want
great.
free
PR has no
association
leverage.
is sovereignty.
Much like
So free
workers don't have
association,
leverage.
in that sense,
Kaylee is
gives
just
us
another of a bunch of
the
people who are
whole
chastising the
quantum
opening
of
ceremony.
authority of powers to actually make our
It's not all
own
about the money
choices.
that the US
But
gives
sovereignty
PR.
has
Yeah.
become a dirty word in Puerto Rico. Politicians are scared to say they support sovereignty, and if they let it slip, it's used against them. This was the candidate for the Popular Democratic Party in the last election.
El Lela hay que desarrollarlo. La soberanía que tú quieres imponerme a mí como etiqueta, pues no me la puedes imponer, no me vas a marcar con eso.
La gráfica no se la pongo yo, se la puso usted mismo.
And that's because the word sovereignty implies separating from the US, still maintaining a relationship. But again, the fear is the possibility of losing some of the benefits. But those who do support sovereignty say it's the only way to decolonize Puerto Rico. They believe that the Commonwealth status, the ELA, shouldn't even be on the ballot the next time that Puerto Ricans vote on this issue.
Realmente yo creo que eso es un disparate. Porque si vamos a descolonizar, pues no puedes tener en la papeleta la opción de la colonia.
But the leaders of the party that Luis Muñoz Marín founded still believe in the Commonwealth status.
¡Qué bueno es el Estado libre asociado! ¡Qué bueno es el ELA!
Do you truly believe that through negotiations with the US, that status can be improved to the point that Puerto Rico has true autonomy?
I think it can be, yes. Because if not, what's the option? I mean, are we going to become a state tomorrow? No. Are we going to become an independent country? I mean, I don't see much support for it here. Frankly, I don't see much support for it in the US either. So simply saying, well, you know, the Commonwealth supporters are happy colonials, or, you know, we just need to eliminate all other options, get them off the table. I don't see where that gets us.
There's also a generational divide. An older generation has stories of their parents or grandparents being lifted out of poverty during what they saw as the golden years of the ELA, while the youth today has grown up seeing budget cuts and unemployment. But that's not to say that there aren't youth that still support the party of Luis Muñoz Marín. Meet Swani and Eat.
Tenemos que comprender que tiene sus ventajas estar aliados con los Estados Unidos.
Oh my God, a man was seen breaking down in tears after firefighter saved his kitty cat from a burning
Personally,
house.
she thinks the status can wait.
I mean, that's actually pretty accurate, though. I think I would care more about my pet than I would about my
Mientras
stuff.
tanto, se sigue cayendo la economía y el país sigue sufriendo, luchando por un estatus político que al final del día no hay ambiente para eso.
In a way, what Swani proposes is the way that Muñoz Marín managed to win elections in the 40s and 50s. His famous phrase was, el estatus no está en issue, or the status is not on the table.
En cuanto se declaró eso, empezó una era de progreso muy rápido en Puerto Rico. Antes había habido un estancamiento tremendo.
But today, some 70 years later, some Puerto Ricans feel stuck again, without full autonomy and without full rights within the US. And you'll see in the next video why some believe the status question can't wait any longer. We're going to be talking about statehood, the pros, the cons, and why after more than 100 years, it hasn't happened.
The Norman army was now well supplied by a town, but it would take a sustained effort to keep.
So is there another video? Oh, okay, perfect.
Why isn't Puerto Rico a state?
Nice.
There have been Puerto Ricans pushing for statehood since the US invaded Puerto Rico at the end of the 1800s.
United States territory since 1898.
In fact, the man who's considered the father of the statehood movement died 100 years ago. So what has taken so long? Why didn't the US make Puerto Rico a state back then when it fought a war and took it from Spain? In one word, racism. The US Supreme Court essentially said they're not like us. They decided that Puerto Rico and other territories now belong to the US, but would not be treated like states because the people who lived there were, quote, alien races. So you might not be surprised when I tell you that was the same court that approved segregation in the United States. Because, again, racism. Wow. But that horrible ruling that discriminated against Black Americans was eventually overturned. But what came to be known as the insular cases are still good law in the US, and Puerto Rico and other territories are still possessions that are treated differently than states. So the Puerto Ricans who still want statehood say it's time to change that.
Puerto Rico is a colony, and would cease to be that once it became a state.
They believe it is overdue.
120 years later, it's about time.
And they say statehood is about democracy and equality.
It is crazy that we are governed by laws that we are not able to decide.
If you watch the 2 other videos in this series, you know not all Puerto Ricans want statehood. But this video is about those who do. After the US came to Puerto Rico and claimed it as theirs, some Puerto Ricans thought this meant they were going to be part of the Union. But those hopes came crashing down when the US put in place a colonial government. The US allowed Puerto Rico to have one person represent them in Congress, but that person could not vote. And that's still the way it is today. But let me take you 50 years after the US took possession of Puerto Rico. They were still not inclined to make Puerto Rico a state.
But at this stage, neither independence nor statehood will meet the realities of Puerto Rico's economic position.
So in the previous video, I talked about how along with the governor, they pushed for what we have today, what we call the Commonwealth. But more and more Puerto Ricans are agreeing that's just a fancy way of saying colony.
Closer to York.
But it's important to note that at the time, a majority of Puerto Ricans supported that Commonwealth status, and the party that represented that option held the governor's seat for a couple of decades. But during that time, the statehood party was right there waiting their turn. And in the late 60s, they won the governor's seat. What they didn't get was a yes vote on statehood. At the time, 60% of Puerto Ricans voted for the Commonwealth status. But once they were in power, the statehood party worked to change the conversation. And for that, we had to talk about Carlos Romero Barceló. Romero Barceló became governor in the 70s, and he was responsible for changing the conversation about statehood in 3 ways. First, he insisted statehood was about equality.
He learned a lot of important lessons throughout his lifetime. Some of them he passed on to me, and I tried to honor him in those lessons. But the most important one that I learned, it's not about being a number, a star in the flag, or a number in a list of states. It's about being equals.
But we're not a racist country.
We are all created equal, and
Carlos
that's what we fight for.
The second one was more controversial because Romero Barceló said statehood is for the poor. He said Puerto Rico should aspire to statehood because it would get the same welfare benefits as the rest of the states. And the reason this was controversial is because Puerto Rico was already heavily dependent on the US at the time.
Today, fully 2/3 of the Puerto Rican populace receive food stamps.
So to some, it sounded like moving in the wrong direction.
When we say that the statehood is for the poor in Puerto Rico, is because they're going to have better services. You have better health services, you have better social services, you have more access to all the benefits that involve being a United States citizen.
And lastly, Romero believed Puerto Ricans are entitled to statehood. Not that it's a privilege, but that it is a right.
Iremos al Congreso no a suplicar de rodillas,
so they don't automatically build and then go. That's stupid.
More than 40 years after that speech and up until the end of his life, Romero stood by that message.
Lo estamos pidiendo, lo vamos a exigir, y no lo pueden negar porque somos ciudadanos americanos.
So the question is, what has changed in those 40 years that Puerto Ricans can now demand statehood and get it?
For the first time in history, we had exactly the same vote as the 37 admitted states. Statehood, yes or no. And we got a majority of the vote.
Puerto Ricans have been asked the question of status 5 times before, with mixed results and a lot of controversy. Because usually the way it goes is that the party in power will call for a vote, but the opposing party will disagree with the way the question is being framed. So in 2012 and 2017, the statehood option won, but the opposing party had called for a boycott, so they said that doesn't count. The statehood party still went to Congress with the results and asked for statehood, but didn't succeed. So in 2020, they tried again, and they asked Puerto Ricans if they wanted statehood, and 52% said yes. But the controversy of previous votes was still there. The arguments against this one are that the majority was too slim for such a monumental decision, that the turnout was low compared to other elections, and that other options were not included.
Always notice that the people that nitpick are those that oppose statehood and that won't accept statehood under any circumstance. So they're not doing it because they want to be electoral Puritans. They're doing it because they're trying to find anything to grab onto to prevent Puerto Rico becoming a state.
And then there's Jose Bernardo Marquez. He's a Puerto Rican legislator who wants statehood for Puerto Rico, but he says all parties should be included in the process.
While we are going to the U.S. government divided, it's the perfect excuse to keep ignoring the issue or saying that it's on us, the inability to find a solution.
There are 2 bills in Congress right now to deal with Puerto Rico's status. One of them seeks to make Puerto Rico a state based on the results of the last election. The other one calls for a status convention, where delegates who are elected by Puerto Ricans come up with status options. The U.S. agrees to those options, and then Puerto Ricans vote on them.
When I say I favor status convention, my support of statehood is questioned. What I'm saying is, I'm really looking for a statehood. I'm not looking for a statehood in a symbolic way in order to gain votes every 4 years.
That last thing he said is directed at the pro-statehood party, and it is a common criticism they face, that they use the issue of statehood to get Puerto Ricans to vote for them. And it is true that every 4 years Puerto Ricans hear the promise of statehood, and that this is the term when it will finally happen. It has even become a joke among some Puerto Ricans.
Si nos ponemos unas metas que son inalcanzables, estamos fallidos.
And to further complicate things, one of the people who got elected this year to advocate for statehood in Congress was Ricardo Rosselló, the governor that Puerto Ricans ousted after a summer of protests. He's one of 6 delegates trying to get support for the statehood bill. Melinda Romero is another one of the delegates, and both their fathers, Rossellós and Romeros, also went to Congress to ask for statehood years ago.
Si no lo quieren darme la cita, pues los espero en el parque. Así que de alguna manera vamos a llegar a los representantes del Congreso.
So did Kenneth McClintock.
Yeah, it took New Mexico 65 years between their first request for statehood and actually being admitted. There was not political will for that, but you have to persevere.
In some ways, New Mexico was like Puerto Rico, in that for a long time it was seen as foreign, with too many Spanish speakers to become a state. But some statehood supporters believe the racism and colonialism that has led to Puerto Rico being treated differently is on its way out.
I denounce and I criticize all of the aspects of that project, a political project that are unjust as colonialism is. I just think that the best way to fight that is participating.
And just like her father, Melinda believes the U.S. owes it to Puerto Ricans.
Our young men and women have spilled all their blood defending the democracy that exists in the United States, and we are a very pro-democratic region, and I think that is one of the most important things that we have. The day that the United States ceases to be a democratic nation and a free nation, well, then maybe you will have more people decided to separate instead of get included. But all the territories were abused at one point or another, and that doesn't mean that the nation in itself it's a bad thing to do.
So will it finally happen this time? Melinda says yes.
First of all, I trust myself. I know what I want, and I usually get what I want. And this is definitely a major change where we are here. We have an elected delegation. The people of Puerto Rico have clearly stated this is what we want. And I feel very confident that we'll be able to pass 1522 and eventually become the 51st or the 52nd state of the union.
What do you think? Do you support statehood for Puerto Rico, and do you think it will happen before this term is over? If you want to learn more about the other options of independence, Commonwealth, and free association, check out my previous 2 videos. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your patience. The reason it took me a little longer to post this 3rd video in this series is because I ran out of money. You might remember I did a fundraiser for the land investigation, so we're all set for that. I've been able to hire amazing local talent to do those videos, and I cannot wait to share the first video of that series with you. But I want to cover more topics.
Yes,
and every other video I've been able to do on this channel in the last year has been because I have a Patreon and I have amazing supporters on there, and their donations help cover the cost of these videos. But you might have noticed that I started hiring people to do fact checking, video editing, graphics, and that can get costly. So I had to pause until I had enough money to get this video done. I have so many more ideas for videos, and I want to bring you high quality content more often. The good news is that now there's a way for you to support me right here on YouTube. It's called memberships, and for a monthly fee, you get exclusive perks, and you'll be supporting my videos. You can join by clicking the button below the video, or by going to the link I'm going to put in the comments. As always, thank you, and I'll see you soon.
Gotta love it. Choke points with archers at the wall. Let's go. No, don't. Stop. How do you stop?
Our order has been sent.
With Hanover to go, do we get the same prices and deals online as we do in store? Ice cream.
Another reason to
now, why are they not taking so much damage, I wonder?
Hurry up, Aaron. Woo! Let's go.
Never miss a beat with TD
Oh my
Clear.
goodness, all these ads. Oh, damn it.
If it's Monday,
we screwed up. We screwed up. I thought we were still listening to her stuff. That didn't work out in our favor. Alright, we got the attack speed up again. Nope. Hey, why wouldn't you walk through the gate? Hold on, guys. We're gonna... Alright, that's what we needed to do. So we missed that. Let's go ahead and do the JD Vance movie or video then. Since we already had that and we wanted to talk about it anyway.
Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, has doubled down on his remarks that the Democratic Party is being led by what he called childless cat ladies. Vance made the original
Have we destroyed everything?
In destroying the Dane outpost, Williams stripped the rebels of a crucial ally.
Via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala
Williams'
Harris,
ultimate goal was within his grasp.
AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
Kamala Harris is a stepmother of 2 children. At the time of Vance's remarks, Pete Buttigieg was in the middle of the adoption process and welcomed his twins shortly afterwards with his husband while serving as Secretary of Transportation. Also in 2021, Vance advocated for a voting system that would allow people with children to cast more votes on behalf of their children. Vance addressed the controversy Friday in a new interview on the Megyn Kelly show on SiriusXM, defending his remarks and repeating his claim that Democrats are anti-family.
Obviously, it was a sarcastic comment. I've got nothing against cats. I've got nothing against dogs. I've got 1 dog at home, and I love them, Megyn. But look, this is not... People are focusing so much on the sarcasm and not on the substance of what I actually said. And the substance of what I said, Megyn, I'm sorry, it's true.
This comes as CNN reports Ohio Senator...
Yeah, that's disturbing that he's trying to push a Christian nationalist state by empowering
16 points in
families Democrats to have more votes and say
favorability in nationwide
in
polls. For more, we're joined by two guests. In San Francisco, Renee Bracey Sherman is with us.
in policy and voting
activist,
than other individuals. That just doesn't make sense.
Who's founder and co-founder.
That's as undemocratic as it gets.
We Testify. Her new article in Teen Vogue is
why does
headlined,
this screen
J.D. Vance doesn't want all women to be trad wives, just white women. Her forthcoming book is titled Liberating Abortion, Claiming Our History, Sharing Our Stories, and Building a Reproductive Future We Deserve.
How much damage do these guys do? It doesn't seem like they're doing a whole lot.
Opinion writer for the New York Times, whose new piece is headlined, Attacking Kamala Harris for Not Having Kids Will Backfire. Not to mention,
so you can't just walk through a gate anymore?
Recent piece is headlined Traditional
How stupid is
Marriage
that?
for Thee, but not for J.D. Vance.
Okay, so guess we'll
Rose is
just
the author of Screaming on the Inside, the unsustainability
do what we do.
of American motherhood. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Jessica Gross, let's begin with you. If you can respond to this, these comments that, yes, that Senator J.D. Vance made when he was running for Senate in 2021, but did
I thought you broke it. Oh my God, guys.
What he said just recently.
We're getting a turn.
Whether or not you have children affects whether or not you support pro-family policies for the United States. We saw Build Back Better.
Oh no! Oh
had
no!
many provisions that were extremely pro-family, and you can argue,
Oh,
okay,
no.
maybe that wasn't the best bill. We don't see Republicans supporting things like paid leave, like child care. We don't see them out front in terms of pro-family policy, and so
They just turned right around and went for me. That's funny.
to be ridiculous and also unpopular, insulting people who are deeply involved in children's lives.
Dang, they're gonna go after
whether
my.
or not they happen to be those children's biological parents. Voters of all political persuasions
Ringing the bell.
have that background, and why are you offending them?
How many
for
will
no
fit in
reason?
here? I wonder.
This is another newly uncovered video from 2021 in which J.D. Vance
Only
blames
5.
critical media coverage of him on journalists who are miserable childless adults.
Many of the
I definitely have the resources for all this, so why aren't they building any faster?
Media are childless adults. Let's just be honest about it. Because look, the elite model, the American dream to the elites is get as much credentials as you can, get as much money as you can, get the most prestigious job, and
So I think we're also going to need to do smart
most of our
settings
mainstream reporters are not impressive
where we
enough
don't
to find a
select
lot of self-meaning in
villagers.
their jobs. They're just not good enough at it.
Jessica Gross,
'Cause
your
that's
response and how
definitely
people
not
are
good here.
responding to this, and
many
where this
villagers?
line, where his attacks are
What?
coming from.
How do you leave? Ungear.
Well, first I want to point out that I had children.
Wow,
So, you know, the media is not just filled with people who don't have children who are bitter. I think it
and
is
we were
a
out
way
of gold
to
anyway.
paint Republicans as the pro-family party, and the media, which he categorizes as liberal, well, it contains people with all sorts of backgrounds, as being anti-family and being
Oh my
bitter
goodness.
and trying to
Having a hard time
encourage other
selecting
people
units.
to be bitter when that couldn't be further from the truth.
I wanted to quote Pete Buttigieg, play a clip, who responded to J.D. Vance's remarks in a recent CNN interview.
What are y'all doing?
The really sad thing is he said that after Chasten and I had been through a fairly heartbreaking setback in our adoption journey. He couldn't have known that, but maybe that's why you shouldn't be talking about other people's children. And it's not about his kids, or my kids, or the vice president's family. It's about your family, people's families whose well-being.
Oh no, did I build the wrong thing?
On whether we go into a future led by someone like Kamala Harris, who is focused on expanding the prosperity, the freedom, the well-being of our families. And by the way, especially if you have kids and you're worried about climate, choosing between.
By the way, Mayor Pete does have a child, so JD doesn't even know what he's talking about. Plus, because Mayo Pete does have a child, right? Mayo Pete, somebody that he outright disagrees with and doesn't believe should have children, would also get additional votes and power and authority based on
Meanwhile,
that.
Friends actress Jennifer Aniston
And I don't.
was one of many
He didn't think it through. Is the obvious takeaway here?
I truly can't believe this is coming from a potential VP of the United States. All I can say is, Mr. Vance, I pray your daughter is fortunate enough to bear children of her own one day. I hope she will not need to turn to IVF as a second option, because you
can we
are
focus
trying
on
to take that
attacking
away from her too, unquote.
without getting
Vance responded to
pulled
Aniston
everywhere
in an
under the
interview
sun?
with Megyn Kelly saying, well, first of all, that's disgusting because my daughter's 2 years old. Second of all, if she had fertility problems, as I said in the speech, I would try everything I could to try to help her because I believe families and babies are a good thing. Jessica Gross, if you can respond to that.
So that's the disingenuous quote that he called him out on?
Stance on IVF in the Senate.
Well, I think he voted against a bill that would have enshrined protections for IVF, so that shows me that if it becomes a partisan issue, we know which side he's on. And I think just having people being supportive of all different kinds of families is
actually
I think
we inadvertently built a lumber
idea than trying to divide us by what our family status may or may not be. And if we want a future where people can have the families that they want and build the families they want,
hold on, we're just going to go ahead and destroy this and fight because they're going to just disingenuously
give him a little bit of credit. He is supportive of a child tax credit, but he also accused Kamala Harris of not being supportive of a child tax credit when she has been out front of being extremely supportive of that.
All right.
You also note if elected, Harris will not be the first American president with no biological children. You write, there were 5 others: George Washington, James Madison, Andrew Jackson, James Polk, and James Buchanan. Warren Harding had a child out of wedlock, publicly denied paternity. That he was the father was confirmed by DNA testing almost a century
King Wilhelm,
later. If you can talk about the sexist double standard, Jessica.
Sure. I think there's still this idea that if you are a woman, unless you bear children, you are somehow less than. And I think it just devalues all of us.
You know, for all of these archers that I have, you would think they would be able to do a lot more
or desiring of having our own children
damage here, but
I just
apparently
can't
not.
think of something that is less American than not giving
Getting
people
these
the freedom
guys to move
decide
guys,
what,
what are you doing?
with their bodies and their family building.
Attack and move.
I just
what are
think
you
it
doing?
has absolutely nothing to do with how you legislate. People at baseline, any legislator should be able to come up with policy and support policy that has nothing to do with them. Because that's what being a legislator is. It is representing all of the people, whether they voted for you.
No, I just lost all my army because the other army didn't want to move forward.
It's completely irrelevant.
All right, so I guess we do the age-old.
There's a history of people being terrible parents who are also leaders, and we don't think of them as any less than in terms of whether or not they were good legislators. It is.
See, do I still have idle eco? I do.
You have also pointed out, and looking at presidents and vice presidents and their opinion on this, has Trump made any comment on this?
I have not seen him comment directly on anything that J.D. Vance has said. He was asked a question about childcare during the debate with Joe Biden, and he didn't answer it at all. He responded with some sort of word salad about how Biden is terrible, and did not answer the substance of the question at all. So who knows what he thinks or what policy he might support when he was president. He really did not do much in terms of family policy, and so
you're killing me here with this.
I would not be optimistic that a Trump presidency would be particularly pro-family.
In 2021, J.D. Vance wrote on social media, universal child care is a massive subsidy to the lifestyle preferences of the affluent over the preferences of the middle and working class. Can you respond?
I think that implies that only affluent women want to work after they have children, and that couldn't be further from the truth. People up and down the socioeconomic ladder have different preferences. There are wealthy women who would prefer to stay home, and there are affluent women who would prefer to work. There are women with fewer resources who would prefer to stay home, and there's women with fewer resources who would prefer to work. And so claiming that how much money you have or how much education you have is directly correlated with wanting to work after you have children is just false. And I think that childcare, whether that is in group, whether it's family childcare, whether it is helping parents stay home if that is what they would prefer, I think feminists and liberals want to support all of those choices. But when I was researching my book, people would tell me I can't afford to work and I can't afford to stay home because their family needed the income from them working, but they didn't make enough to pay for childcare. And that is putting American families in impossible situations where their preferences aren't even coming up. So let's get families the help that they need to even be able to make the choices.
Oh no, I guess we do want archery ranges, but
also,
not there.
Vance's views on no-fault divorce and pornography are now surfacing. How do you reconcile those views with his running mate, Donald Trump, who is 3 times divorced and, of course, was found liable for paying money to a porn star, an adult movie star?
I mean, they're not reconcilable. I don't know what to say. Like, they're completely opposite. We know who's at the top of the ticket. I think also, Vance is sort of a self-proclaimed.
Is there any particular reason
I don't
why?
Even know how seriously he takes all of these things he said. He appeared on a lot of podcasts and said a lot.
She
of
even
things,
said Pamela has been a great
including,
stepmother and loves the kids like their own. As Jesus said, even awful people love their kids. Oh my God! Did he actually say that? That's wild.
I don't know what to think about all of that, but certainly I don't think that Donald Trump would support getting rid of no-fault divorce if only for his own self-interest.
Well, Jessica Gross will link to your op-ed piece in the New York Times attacking Kamala Harris for not having kids will backfire.
What is with this unit? Like, come on. What are we not achieving here? So they're just constantly getting, what, longbowmen? Why aren't we getting anywhere? Okay, because we just don't have the same power?
Right now on Morning News Now, with less than 100 days to the presidential election, both campaigns are ramping up the rhetoric.
She's a radical left lunatic.
Some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird.
We've got the latest from the campaign trail and the big announcement from the vice president that could be just days away.
Be like
also this morning, tensions in the Middle East are ratcheting up. Israel blaming Hezbollah and vowing a major retaliation following a deadly rocket attack launched from Lebanon, as American diplomats worry escalation could lead to a new front in the war. Plus, California on fire. Families forced to evacuate as crews battle the largest wildfire the West Coast has seen in years. Hundreds of thousands of acres have already been torched, and with the flames showing no signs of slowing, smoke from the fires are now reaching all the way to the East Coast. We've got the latest. And the Olympics are officially underway. So where do things stand after the first weekend of action? We're breaking down all the highlights you may have missed and what you need to know and be on the lookout for the week as it kicks off. Good morning, I'm Emily Ikeda in for Joe and Savannah. We begin this Monday morning with a tightening race for the White House, which is now less than 100 days away. Recent polls show former President Trump and Vice President Harris approaching a dead heat in multiple battleground states. Those polls leading Trump to sharpen his attacks on Harris and the Democratic Party over the weekend. First, at the National Bitcoin Conference in Nashville, he dismissed Harris's recent surge in the polls as a honeymoon phase.
We have a country to run.
Unfortunately,
the
could
problem
be
is
true.
that Kamala is worse than
Unfortunately,
Joe.
this could
She's
very well
worse.
be true.
She's a radical left lunatic.
Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, also held a rally in Minnesota, the one state where Harris has the biggest lead. But the Republican nominee spent a large part of his speech hurling attacks at President Biden. Meanwhile, Harris's campaign held a fundraiser in Massachusetts Saturday that earned more than $1 million, adding to her massive $200 million fundraising total just 1 week into the race. We have a team joining us this morning to break down all the latest in the race to the White House, including NBC News senior political reporter John Allen, along with NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez.
That actually is probably my favorite.
Thanks for being here. John, I want to start with you. Minnesota is the one state where VP Harris is currently beating former President Trump, and it's a state that hasn't voted Republican in over 50 years. So why is he focusing his time and energy there? And we're still seeing attacks at Biden.
Yeah, the reason he's spending some time and energy there is that there has been Trump polling over the course of this campaign that shows him competitive there. And certainly in the last weeks of the Biden campaign, before we got a Harris campaign, the numbers there, according to independent pollsters, had closed significantly. So, number one, I think there was already a plan to go to Minnesota and make that a state that was going to be sort of a battleground, expanding the battleground from where they had been, and he followed through on that plan. We'll have to see what happens.
Surely,
I mean, we're
now that they wasted
sort of
all that
early in
effort
this
on me.
phase of a new campaign of Harris versus Trump, as opposed to Biden versus Trump.
Yeah, we'll have to watch the numbers closely. Gabe, what a difference a week makes. The Harris campaign seemed to have a successful turnout at its fundraising event this weekend, and it's prioritized trying to win Gen Z
just
support.
get in there
Walk us
and then
through
start
what she had to say and what her main message is to those younger
you're going to get attacked.
Good morning. Well, yes, it's no secret that President Biden had a difficult time with young voters, and Vice President Harris is really trying to lean into that. Now, in the past couple of days, she's taken more direct attacks on former President Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance, referring to them as weird, also really attacking those comments back from 2021 where J.D. Vance referred to some Democrats as, quote, childless cat ladies. But the vice president and her team are really leaning into social media, trying to win over those Gen Z voters. There's been a lot of memes, of course, the Kamala Black phenomenon. They're really leaning into that, hoping it might convince some of these younger voters to go out to the polls.
That's a lot of
as of
Bible
now,
quotes.
the last several days, her main message has been is that young voters delivered the 2020 election to Joe Biden, and she is trying to get that same type of enthusiasm this November, Emily.
Yeah, something tells me this is just the beginning of the memes. John, the polls almost immediately tightened after VP Harris entered the race. But interestingly, her policies are largely the same as Biden. So what's swaying voters' opinions? Why is it becoming a closer matchup between her and Trump versus Trump and Biden?
I mean, right off the bat, you have a candidate in Joe Biden who was struggling so much that he chose not to seek re-election, decided to step aside. Here's a guy who was running for president for basically his entire adult life, who, eventually realized that there was not a path to victory for him. And the reason was Democratic voters were not excited about him. Independent voters were worried about him. Republican voters thought that he should not be in office now based on his apparent decline. So replace him with somebody who's got energy and enthusiasm, who is not stumbling in public appearances in the same way. And I think that's just in and of itself, a big reason for why you've seen the polls change so quickly. And I would just say the other thing is, Kamala Harris is somebody who Democrats are excited about. That they feel like they can, they all feel like they can, punch the ticket or pull the lever in the ballot box for her. So, again, we're still early. We haven't even hit Labor Day yet, but the Democratic Party kind of had a 180 on the energy behind its candidate.
And Gabe, let's go back to President Biden for a second. We know he's headed to Texas today.
I would not argue that there's been a 180. I think the Democratic Party has always said, you will vote for our candidate and deal with it, or else you're a fascist and going to support Team Red. Also, this isn't the same video, is it? We got through the J.D. Vance thing, didn't we? Sorry. Wasn't aware of that. Let's finish watching this video, and then we will move on to our next.
He was killed.
We're gonna watch the
as King
New York
Henry
State
I.
Board of Elections purging voter
But there was a
rolls.
problem. At the time, Henry's elder brother, Robert, Duke of Normandy,
And they
had been
claim
on
you're a
crusade.
bot, yeah.
When he returned, he was furious that Henry had grabbed the throne.
A newly published investigative piece from City and State takes us inside the staggering
From
purge
Normandy,
of some
Robert attempted to
200,000
invade
New York City
England
voters
to claim
from the
the crown
2016
from his brother.
presidential primary. The Attorney General at the time, Eric
But he
Schneiderman,
failed.
revealed that the city's Board of Elections was
And
responsible
returned
for
home.
illegally wiping these individuals
In
off of the
retaliation,
rolls.
Henry
Repercussions,
struck back.
however, seem fairly minimal.
In a
Although
reversal
Schneiderman's
of
office filed a
1066,
lawsuit, a
he
settlement was
crossed the
quietly
channel
reached. A
and
vague list of
invaded
reforms
Normandy,
were agreed to. But,
intent on
according to City
undermining
and
his
State
brother
reporter,
Robert's rule.
Stacey Asip, there's, quote, scant evidence that
His
the City
first
Board of
target
Elections
was
has
Bayer.
done nearly enough to clean up its act. And furthermore, there's little
Thought Henry
sign
was
that
dead.
the Democrats,
This rich and
who control
splendid
much
city
of
was
New
one of
York,
the
have
jewels of
political
Normandy.
will to reform our
I was called that when I started
Henry
railing
was
hard
to
against
begin his
Biden when he
campaign
chose Ukraine
by
over the people of
unleashing
East
the
Palestine,
forces
Ohio.
of the city.
Yeah.
So
No
what was
kidding,
about the
right?
story that
No kidding.
Bayer was
They
about
started
to
calling
feel
me that in
the
2015.
wrath of the English
To be honest
army.
with you, I'd expected
I don't know that I was ever called a Russian bot, but I know
it seemed like
even
nobody
after I
followed
ran
up
for
on
DNC
it.
chair, the Democrats wanted
there were
nothing to do with me.
200,000
Because I
Well,
had the
actually, at the
audacity
time,
to say
it
that what they were doing was
126,000
not
voters
working.
in Brooklyn, and then nothing. It seemed like the story flatlined.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think it just seemed?
Well, as I brought up in my story, when Eric Schneiderman first intervened, he joined a lawsuit that existed. He announced it on January 27th, and it was, the week that Trump was inaugurated, so people's attention was elsewhere.
How did these people find out?
In the brotherly
that their
feud
names
over
had been
Normandy,
purged?
King
The
Henry
first
I
problem was
set out to make an
purges
example of
occurred,
Bayer, a
but
town
the New York
still
City
loyal
Board
to
of
his brother
Elections
Duke Robert.
had not synced their database up with the state. So
Henry's
they're
archers
supposed to
took up
do it
position on high
November
ground
1st
outside
and
See,
April
this is
1st.
why we need
By
universal
then.
voter registration, and I am fairly positive I did update my website to include that.
Voters went
Having
to check their
deployed their
registrations.
tailings, Henry's
The
archers were
data
well
wasn't
protected against the
in
cavalry charge.
November.
Yep, voting rights.
They defeated the
So
first
they
patrol.
didn't start to find out
Guessing
until April
that's that
1st
one.
of
Oh,
2016.
I have
and the
not only,
primary was
I
on
have two.
April
I have
19th, so it didn't
universal
give them
voter
any time to-
registration
Yeah.
and protecting voter
Let me
rights.
jump ahead to a couple of
Sure.
things, because we talk about it in your article, and one of the things you mentioned is there the political will? Basically, the Democrats empowered to do this. Why do you think that might be?
Well, I can give theories based
They'll
on
call
my
you
evidence
Russian
that I found.
bots for
that
talking about the Russian gates
One of
or
the
any of
reasons
that.
New York
Yeah.
State has some of the most restrictive laws with regard to registering and voting is that it favors incumbents and
As
establishment
Henry set
Democrats
his sights on
who
burning
control
Bayer,
Why do we want to
the
change things when we're doing
reinforcements
okay
arrived
right
to
now?
join his
Yeah, in
army.
fact, I think it was yesterday in the New York Times, they said, for the first time, Democrats control the state Senate. I think it's the first time in 10 years. And they said the first thing they should do is electoral reform. So, let's see how that goes. And these purges drew attention to the fact that we have these restrictive laws. I mean, had people been able to change parties earlier than October 9th, I mean, you had to change parties. How many months is that?
People have no idea what these restrictions.
Yeah, people don't know the dates. And there was all kinds of problems with people that were trying to newly register. The DMV's database crashed, so...
I experienced this myself. I registered hundreds of people, and they claimed that the registrations were not received on time, and they refused to
I don't
honor.
know what the problem
Yeah, which is half the nonsense, right? Like, how can you live in a free country of democracy and then literally not respect democracy? Why do we have to register to vote at all? That should be granted upon turning 18 universally, and the only thing you have to update is where you live if you happen to move. Like, I don't understand that.
So, I'm going to suggest to folks who they haven't had a chance to read it was with excellent reporting and again making us understand.
Oh, do we have more?
Problem that needs to get resolved. Hopefully down the road we'll get to that again. But are there any of those reforms back?
All right,
Stacey,
thank you
thanks
so
again.
much.
Great work. We appreciate it.
Bro. Damn, that was it? Damn. All right.
The English approached Bayeux and saw that its towering stone walls would not be breached by manpower alone.
I think we
Henry
had
would need siege
another
equipment
video.
and a defensible location to construct it.
Oh, yes, this one. This is probably also going to be a short video, but...
Could this be America's last election if Donald Trump wins? Listen to what the former president told a Christian group at the Turning Point USA Believers Summit in West Palm Beach. The former president telling the crowd that if they re-elect him to the White House, they won't have to worry about voting ever again.
And again, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm not Christian. I love you.
I thought maybe it was taken out of context.
In 4 years, you don't have to vote again.
But he straight up went full Christian fascism.
He said it 3 times. Now the Harris for President campaign releasing this statement after the former president's speech tonight, saying, quote, America can do better than the bitter, bizarre, and backward-looking delusions of criminal Donald Trump. Vice President Kamala Harris offers a vision for America's future focused on freedom, opportunity, and security. Hello, I'm Mark Brown. Get more great ABC7 content by clicking the subscribe button for our YouTube channel. And download the ABC7 Los Angeles streaming app on Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, and Roku to watch on your TV.
Whoops. That was it.
8 Democrats on the Harris campaign's radar for the VP slot. That was still pretty damn
depressing.
So let's bring in 2 of our
disturbing, to say the
NBC
least.
reporters who have been covering 2 of the top.
He actually said the words. Well, Marianne Williamson wasn't really running anyway, was she? Oh, wow. Speaking of...
At Vistaprint, we print your brand on everything, like t-shirts,
we got
hats,
AOC
totes,
up top
hoodies,
here.
and ooh, really...
Puerto Rico has been under U.S. rule for more than 120 years. Its current status is that of a territory or a commonwealth. But across political parties, many agree that in practice, Puerto Rico is being treated as a modern-day colony today. And there have been many attempts to change this. Puerto Ricans have voted 6 times regarding Puerto Rico's status. But those votes were non-binding, so Congress didn't have to abide by the results. Well, just today, House members presented a bill that would lead to yet another vote. But this time, Congress would be involved in the process, and Puerto Ricans would choose between statehood, independence, or free association. To talk about this bill, I was joined today by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Here's our conversation. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So let's talk about this bill. To give a little bit of context, there were 2 bills in Congress to try to deal with Puerto Rico's status. There was the one bill that was known as the statehood bill, and that one sought to recognize the results